Welcome to WTUFO. I hope you're enjoying watching or listening. If you'd like to support the show directly, you can do that at patreon.com/WTUFO, patreon.com/WTUFO. That will help increase the chances that the show continues to exist. If you're listening on a podcast player, you can also rate and review us. That'll help the algorithm know to tell other people about us. And likewise, if you're on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. And finally, if you're really digging it, you can post us on your favorite social or put us in a thread to your friends. Just kind of helping us spread the word, since we're a new show, is extremely useful and a valuable contribution to our mission. So thank you so much for engaging. I hope you enjoy the episode. Heads up about this one, it's advanced. This is double black diamond, straight moonshine UFO stuff. Not for the faint of heart and not for those just tiptoeing into the subject. If you're new to ufology, you might want to start with one of the science episodes, like with Rich Hoffman or Dr. Knuth or Robert Powell or Dr. Shadagas. This episode is more for people who are down the rabbit hole a little bit already and who are more open to major conspiracy and cover-up discourse, and also to what you might call high woo consciousness, meaning of life type stuff. So with that caveat, I think it's a lot of fun, but it is a little overwhelming, and some of it's pretty out there. So take it for what it's worth, and I hope you enjoy. What the UFO? I'm here with Grant Cameron, UFO researcher and writer. Grant, it's great to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Well, pleasure. I really appreciate your interest in what I'm doing. Hopefully I can add something to the knowledge of the people that listen to you.
Thank you, man. I wouldn't be surprised, because I think you're pretty far down the rabbit hole at this point. My understanding of your research is it's pretty deep and it goes way back. So I'd love to just start by asking you to give us a bit of an overview of your work so far.
Okay. Actually, as of May, upcoming May, it's 50 years that I started.
Wow.
When I was at university, had no interest in university. I couldn't figure out with calculus and where did the numbers go? What's a function? Like, how are you going to make any money out of this nonsense? And at the same time, there was a set of UFO sightings that occurred in Manitoba. I lived in the middle of Manitoba, in the middle of Canada, right just above the northern United States, across the border. And these sightings started. And I said to my friend, I said, hey, let's go and see what they're looking at. I had no interest in UFOs, but it was just that it was a big story all the time. And that was February of 1975 when it started. We didn't go out until May of 1975, when a local TV station filmed this thing. It was on the ground and it jumped to 5,000 feet in the air in 1/8 of a second. It was caught on film. So you got the Nimitz story, where it goes from 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second. This went from ground level to 5,000 feet in the air in 1/8 of a second. And so they caught this on film, and then it was moving up and down, and it was rotating and stuff, and they caught it as it was flying along through the sky. So the TV station did a big 8-minute documentary on it. It was a big story. And that's when I said to my friend, I said, come on, let's go see what they're looking at. And the way I always describe it is, it's like you buy the lottery ticket. There's a chance you're going to win, but you ain't going to win. There's no way. Everybody else can see something. You're not going to see anything. So we went out there and we drove into town, out of the town, in the town, out of the town for an hour. And my friend said to me, he said, okay, we'll go back into Carmen one more time. If you don't see anything, let's go home. I said, fantastic. This has been a total waste of time. So we turned the car to go back in. And as we turned the car and get it going west again, the thing appeared from the left to the right. And as I described to people, there's a thing in ufology where you have people who say they believe. And then there are people who know. Big difference between reading a book and believing and being in the experience. So we were sitting there looking as we were in the town, and we're looking at, well, what are they looking at? Like, what's so important? And we're looking around and we couldn't see. Whatever it is, it's not very important what they're looking at. And when it appeared, nobody in the car said, is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what it is. Everybody just went, there it is. It's like, oh, it was just so weird. It was like it was alive. It was pulsing. It was red. It was a plasma object, longer than it was high, came right in front of the car. And it's almost like when I look back, you look reflectively back at your career, and it was almost like the phenomena, the intelligence, I call it, wanted to make absolutely sure that there was no doubt in my mind that I wouldn't waste any more time on UFO sightings. And that's what's happened. So it was right there. It was in close, and it was going behind these school buses. And I remember I told my friend, stop the car. And I was trying to get out of the car. It was still moving, and I was going through the ditch because I knew it was going to go in behind these school buses. And I remember as it flew away, I was looking through the school buses, and it just pulsed away, and it just sort of flew off. Dragged all my friends out 2 nights later. I said, you got to see this. It's the most amazing thing. It'll change your life, man. You can't believe this. My friends came, they were there for an hour, and then they said, yeah, we're going back. We're going back to Winnipeg. I said, no, you got to see this. Don't go. They said, no, we're hungry. We're going back to Winnipeg for pizza. And all my friends left. There was 28 people when it started. There was about 8 people when it finally came, which is about 15 minutes after my friends left. And this time it was different. And which I point out to people that Jim Lukatsky, who ran the OSAP program, said all UFO sightings are different. And I say to people, pay attention to that. I think that's true. So what happened the second night, it started it was like a flash cube on the horizon. Just we're all looking into the west, and it's just this flash cube. There were some kids who were with us who were sitting in the field, and they yelled out, they said, is that it? Is that it? And I looked and I go, yes, so. And it just looked weird. And then it was another flash, and a flash, and a flash, and a flash, and a flash. And it was jumping around the sky. It was jumping around, and we called it the bouncing ping pong ball. And I remember we had ours, and people were yelling and screaming and swearing. And as this thing was coming towards us, and the flashes got closer and closer together as it came towards us. And I remember the car beside it was a courier car. There's 3 guys, and there was a girl in the car. And I still remember this like it happened yesterday. They were there, and the guy had a Nikon camera with a motor drive, which in those days you were shooting straight 35 millimeter film, and you had these motor drives that would advance the film very fast. You would just click. And so the girl was there, and it was jumping around the sky, and people were yelling and screaming. She was crying. I can't see it. I can't see it. Someone show it to me. I can't see it. Where is it? I can't see it. And it was jumping around the sky, and I could just hear her screaming, people yelling and screaming, and this camera. It was going click, zzz, click, zzz, click, zzz, click. It was just unloading the camera as this thing was coming towards us. And as it came towards us, then it turned into this object that I saw 2 nights before, except it had a green glow on the backside of it. And it was flying along, and it was pulsing. It came really in close. At night, it's hard to tell size and distance, but I would assume maybe half a mile away in the field, down again, very, very low, like treetop level, maybe a couple 100 feet up, 100 feet up. And it came at us, and then it made this turn, and it sort of went back the way it came. And I remember as it was flying away, people are still yelling and screaming. And this other car said, we're going to chase it. And they got in their car, and I remember the gravel was flying, and they went chasing off after this thing. And I remember I was just watching it, and I'm going, that is so cool. This is like miracle. This is like a miracle in the Bible. I actually got to see this. I'm going, wow. And I'm thinking, man, that could be an extraterrestrial from another space, from another planet. I'm just watching this thing as it's pulsing. It's just flying away into the same direction, sort of into the northeast. And then I thought to myself, which became one of the most important things in my career, is I was watching it and I'm going, hey, what's it doing? It's not doing anything. It's just like, we made a joke, because we were near the American border, and American beer didn't have as much alcohol content as Canadian beer. So we had the joke was the reason they were coming here is to pick up beer, and they're going back to the United States with the beer, Yeah, we couldn't figure out what it was. And then when 40 years later I was doing a lecture, I went back to the guy who ran the airport at the place. He was like the tour guide. And I said, Bob, why were they here? Like, what was going on? Like, farming has nothing. It's a little town, 2,000 people farming and whatever. He said, I told you why they came. And I said, I don't remember. I don't know. He said, I told you, 1975, I told you why they came. And I said, Bob, it's been 40 years. I don't remember. 35 years, whatever it was. I can't remember. And he said, the missile silos. I told you, the missile silos. And I go, oh, yeah, because we all knew that if there was ever a nuclear war, Winnipeg was gone, because we were only a few miles north of the missile silos in Canada. Every 10th Russian missile would land short right on top of us. So we knew we were gone. If there was ever an exchange, because that's what happens is they're going to take out the missiles. The first wave of missiles is it's not take out Washington, New York. So you got to take out the missiles. Otherwise, you're not going to know what's going to happen after your game over. So anyway, that's what started it. And I remember I did a manuscript. I went and interviewed a lot of people in the town and stuff like that. Nobody wanted to talk, but I got this manuscript of all the sightings and weird things that happened, stuff like that. And there was no abductions. There was 32 horses disappeared. There's no horse mutilations, but there was 32 horses that disappeared. And that guy took so much flack. The guy, and they were PMU horses, so they were using them for birth control pills. They had them hitched up in barns and stuff like that, pregnant mares. And these 32 horses had disappeared. But other than that, it was all just straight sighting stuff, like things in the middle of the road and farmers seeing these things flying around and stuff, and landing traces, which don't happen anymore, where the things would land. And so I did the manuscript, and then the next big thing happened to me is I went to try to get it published. And I went to Toronto, which is the place you publish in Canada. And there's one that did a reading, but they weren't really that interested. But in the local publisher in Winnipeg, where it was a big story, everybody knew what it was, this big story. And I went to her, and I remember her rejection letter said, "Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers." And I went, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Well, I couldn't believe this. Like, this is the most important story in the world. I thought I was going to be a millionaire. I'd sell a million books, and, it was all nothing. Just nobody cared." And that's why I said, no more sightings. Sightings are just stories you tell your kids when you go old and gray. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in trying to impress anybody or try to convince anybody what's going on. I know what I saw, and somebody's got to know what's going on. And that's my whole career, was to try to find somebody who knew, find the highest level person you could, and just listen to them and find out what's going on. So I went after the Canadian government. That led me to the former president of Penn State University, who had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, who was chairman of the board of the biggest Institute for Defense Analysis, which is the biggest military think tank for the U.S. government. It was there when the cover-up started, and we had some interviews with him, and he basically talked rhymes and riddles, basically told us what was going on. And then that led to the president. His records are going to the press. Some of his records are going to the Truman Library. And that's when I went to the Truman Library, and that's when I said, "Hey, the president's the most important guy in the world. He's got to know what's going on. I'm looking for Walker's files." So then I said to the guy, "Hey, what do you got on UFOs?" And they only had a couple of documents where in 1952 there were the overflights, and people were sending in telegrams to say, "Don't shoot them down, Mr. President. Don't shoot them down." That was all they really had. And then I was so amazed. I went, "Oh." So I said, "Well, the Eisenhower Library is like a couple of miles down the road, a couple of hours." And so I went there, and then they had 5 documents. I said, "You got 5 documents?" And yeah. And I said, "Well, how many pages you got in the Eisenhower Library?" And they said, 28 million pages. And I go, "Something's wrong here." And that was my pursuit, to go after the president. And then when I realized there was no presidential documents, I realized that this thing was being kept silent, that it was a thing you kept the president away from, and it was all done orally, that you didn't produce any paperwork. And that led me to intelligence and to the guy that I think is the gatekeeper, the guy that it briefs the president, who's briefing tomorrow or the next day. There will be a briefing for the president-elect Trump.
Time stamping us here, we're speaking just a few days before President Trump gets sworn in, and just before you hopped on, you were saying there's a breaking story about him getting briefed this weekend. This will now be a couple weeks ago when our episode comes out. But can you tell us anything about that? Or
sure. Okay. So basically, I've written four books. One's coming out this coming week. It's called Beyond Managing Magic. So I wrote a book called Managing Magic, which is the idea, and supposedly people in the CIA like this, was the idea that it's not UFOs, it's magic. It's the whole thing. We got a phenomenology problem. So it's not just UFOs, it's paranormal phenomena, it's remote viewing, it's ghosts, it's dead people, it's, all this kind of stuff. It's all the same thing. And so I'd written this book called Managing Magic, and then I did 2 other follow-up books, which was called Beyond Managing Magic. The one that's coming out in a couple of days is called Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane. And from time to time, when you're working in the field, you get very frustrated. Like, oh, this thing's not going anywhere. We're not, it's all just failing and whatever. And I was in one of those moods. And then I got as clear as day in my mind was this sort of idea where it said, "Don't worry, Grant. Don't worry about it. We know how to land a plane." And I went, oh, I knew exactly what it meant. We know how to land a plane. So this is called Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane. And this is this whole idea. If you listen to Jim Semivan, who is this equivalent to a 2-star general in the CIA, he said there does not appear to be any there. And then he said, when he was asked, "Well, who's running the show?" And he said, "They are." And this is the whole idea. They're in control of disclosure. The phenomena is running the whole show, and they're disclosing. They're not covering up, and they're not disclosing. They're sort of disclosing, which is exactly the same thing the government does. So what the government, I maintain, does is they leak stuff, then they deny it, and they'll give it to very bad witnesses, like Bob Lazar is a prime example. So if you know Bob Lazar doesn't have the 2 degrees that he knows he has, then you give him the message. If you want it out, you give it to New York Times and Washington Post. But if you don't want it out, you give it to Bob Lazar. And then once everybody discovers Bob Lazar doesn't have two master's degrees, everybody says, "Oh, he's a fraud. He didn't have the good degrees." And everybody says, "It's all hoax." And then it gets dumped. And the idea that there's UFOs at Area 51 gets put out there, but nobody can confirm the story. And the aliens are doing the same thing. I call it the Jesus circus, or the theory of wow. So why do UFOs have lights on them? They have lights on them so you can see them. They want you to go, "What is going on?" But you'll never figure out anything. No paranormal phenomena has ever been figured out. And that the paranormal phenomena is appearing whether it's ghosts or whether it's UFOs or whatever. It's to change our attitude, our vision of how the world works. Because if this paranormal phenomena is working, if it's real, then there's something wrong with the way we understand the world. And that's our problem, is that we're really relying on our perceptions. So this thing with this book was to come out, and I actually talked to my editor this morning, and I said to her, okay, no more editing. I can edit some more. It's still taking, sometimes I got time to work on it. Sometimes I said, that's it. Let's go with the book because the story broke. So the way the story broke is it's the key figure is a guy by the name of Dr. Ronald Pandolfi. And I maintain that Ronald Pandolfi is the gatekeeper. He's the guy, as he says, who has the keys. If somebody wants a briefing, a high-level briefing, say a gang of 8 guy, they send it to Ron Pandolfi, or the science advisor to the president. He was asked for a briefing, to give a briefing to them. So he's the guy that controls all the classified material. So what happened?
I want to make sure I'm tracking him correctly. Did you say Ronald Pandolfi, like Pandolfi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I call him the gatekeeper. He's one of the other expressions they have is the guy who runs the weird desk at the CIA. So it's not UFO desk. It's the weird desk. And it's the thing is, so the guy before him, his name was Dr. Kit Green, and he was a physiologist. He's at Wayne State University, and he was the control officer for the remote viewing program for 20 years. So these are the guys that deal with all the weird stuff. And the guy before Kit Green was a guy by the name of Arthur Lundahl, who was the guy who went into the president's office, Kennedy's office, and showed him the photographic images from Cuba. This is a missile silo. This is a missile, and gave the briefing. He was an expert on photographs, satellite photographs and stuff.
And that was Art Lundahl.
Lundahl, Hundal, I think it is. And so these are the guys that run the weird desk. So I've always watched Ron, and people say he's totally crazy. Why are you wasting your time with this guy? And that's the whole idea. They want to look crazy. So you look like a crazy guy because you don't want people to really believe you. You just want them to hear the story. So anyway, what happened is they've gone back and forth on various stories, and he said, you're just repeating what Dan Smith. So Dan Smith is a key figure in this whole thing. Dan Smith is Ron Pandolfi's best friend. He's his best man at his second wedding. He's the godfather to Ron Pandolfi's daughter, Kashmir. And he's sort of like, he calls himself the scribe. So he says that he walks around and he has over 1,000 conversations with Ron about various things, and UFOs will come up. He'll say, my radar is on. And Ron will say something. And if my radar is on, I catch it. If my radar is not on, I don't catch it. Ron doesn't repeat things. He just sort of lets things drops. And if you get it, you get it. You don't. So anyway, Ron drops a lot of stuff. And then what happens is Dan will post it on a place called Open Minds Forum, which is sort of a place where if you want to go, it's a place where we always used to think intelligence people were exchanging messages. And so you put it on there, and it's really weird. It's really hard to read. It's like guys are being poetic, and it's rhymes and riddles and stuff. And I'll show people, and they go, I can't read that stuff. You have to know who all the players, because everybody's got a code name. And so Dan Smith has written this blog for probably 25 years. He's been writing this blog called Best Possible World. Anyway, so I watched Ron his blog. And what happened a couple of days ago is Ron dropped this thing to him that said there's going to be a meeting with President-elect Trump. And the people who are going to be in the meeting are John Warner, who's the son of the former Senator John Warner in the U.S. Senate. Chris Mellon, who you probably heard of, who's with To the Stars, who's working with Congress. Chris Mellon will be in the meeting. Jack Sarfati, who is a physicist who believes that he's got the UFO propulsion figured out, the mathematics for it, will be in the meeting. And Ron Pandolfi and his wife will be in the meeting. His wife is very, very powerful. And I won't get into that whole story about his wife. It's like the whole book. Anyway, and apparently the wife is going to run the meeting. So this is this meeting. And so Dan Smith posted on his blog. I saw it and I immediately screenshotted it. And I put it on my Facebook and my Twitter. So I've got a lot of followers. I've got 45,000 followers on Twitter. I've got 6.5, almost 7,000 on Facebook. So that's my impression of what they wanted to do. They put it on Dan's site. They knew I read Dan's site. They knew I would post the thing, and this thing would start to take off. Because on Open Minds Forum, nobody reads it. But I read it, and I post it on mine, and then people start saying, what's going on? Where do you get this from? And what happened was the first one I got was this morning. I think we posted yesterday. Ron came back to me and said, you're lying. You're making stuff up again. You should be ashamed of yourself and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, no, Ron, I'm not lying. And it's like, that's what they do. So they try to take it away and they play this game. And I say, Ron, is this your job? Is this your daytime job? Is this what you do during your day? Are you playing on the computer when you're supposed to be working? Because he will answer anybody. You can email Ron Pandolfi. He will answer you. One of his jobs is to deal with the loons. So he calls about loons, crooks, and worse. And he calls me a crook because I steal quotes from him and stuff like that. So it's loons, crooks, and worse. And what he does, he just sort of he puts stuff out through me, and it's like disinformation. It's like this guy's crazy. This guy's crazy. This guy's a Scientologist, and he sort of tries to kill the story. And it's the same thing. It's like you put the story out and then you pull the story back. So anyway, he comes to me and he sort of attacks me for posting this. And then this morning, John Warner, who was one of the people who was going to be in the meeting, writes an email to me and to Nicole Sackich, who is a girl, a very smart girl out of Illinois, who's worked with me. She co-wrote a book that we did on triangles, and she's worked on a number of podcasts with me. She's very sharp. And he writes a letter to her and me, and he says, go reproduce yourself, in very slang terms. And he said, to you and to Nicole. And I'm going, well, Nicole wasn't even involved in this thing. And the thing was, he's mad because I'm outing the meeting. And then I went to Jack Sarfati. So I went to, I actually posted to Larry Warner, the first post I posted it, this sort of a threat. Then I went to John Warner's site, and then I went to Jack Sarfati. I said, Jack Sarfati, confirm or deny. And then Jack said, you were to immediately take off all this stuff off your public media. And so I wrote him because of national security. And I said, well, Jack, just to let you know, remind you, I'm not an American. I'm a Canadian. And now there's discussion about the Americans coming in and taking over Canada. So my idea of national security is a little bit different than your idea of national security. And then he came back and basically threatened me and said, if you don't, and he told me what was going to happen to me. And he said, you're to do this immediately. So then that I'm going to post as we finish this interview. I'm going to post that and tell people, if you ever get a threat, you go public. A lot of people get scared and they sort of cower down. I say, what you do is don't go in a high building with windows. And number two, go public and stay public with if you're being threatened. So this would happen. Two of the people in the meeting have come after me, which basically confirms, yes, there is this meeting taking place on the weekend. Now, we're not really sure what's going to happen. Jack Sarfati thinks he's got the UFO propulsion down, that he's going to teach Trump how the UFO propulsion works on these drones. And it's all mathematical stuff. And I said to Jack Sarfati, I said, you think Donald Trump's going to be able to understand this? He said, yep. And I go, okay, whatever, you know. And so I don't know what's going to happen at the meeting, but I've gotten these two sort of confirmations. Ron Pandolfi has not come back all day, as far as I know, so far today, to attack me for these latest postings that I've made. He's being silent, which usually he will attack me right away and try to counter the story that I'm putting on Facebook. So he's on Facebook, he's not on Twitter, and I'm the only person that he engages on Facebook. So it must mean that he likes me, or I'm very close to the target.
And getting this on the record, Ronald Pandolfi has been associated as a potential CIA agent and associated with the Director of National Intelligence and the National Intelligence Council and the Defense Intelligence Agency. But we don't know any of this for sure. We don't have, as far as I can find, any public statement about his official positions in any of these.
I think there was one CIA where he was brought in front of Congress about Chinese technology, about Hughes Aircraft giving technology to China. He testified in front of Congress at one point. And I think they identified him. So it was the old idea. He even said I follow people. What I do is I don't really engage him. Now I'm engaging him more, but I talk to people who are around him and that are friends with him and what's he saying and stuff. And I just sort of listen on the sidelines. And so of course I ask all these people, I said, so the idea is he's going to retire. He's supposed to be retiring right now. So I say to his friends, so is he retired? No, I don't think so. And I say, well, is he still CIA? Is he the Director of National Intelligence? And they all say the same thing. Well, he pretends to go to work somewhere every day. Uh-huh. Even they don't know. And the one person was told what he was actually, his position was. And he said, that's the only thing you're not allowed to tell Grant. Do not tell Grant who I work for. But he definitely is some sort of intelligence. And he's been since 1980 1983. He came into the Reagan administration, and he did say to me at one point, this is a couple days ago, or maybe a week ago, I was engaging him because I said, I may be a crook, but you're a hypocrite, because he runs a foundation called the Kashmir Foundation, named after his daughter, and his wife is very interested. He's very interested in stopping poaching of wild game animals around the world. Mm-hmm. And yet Donald Trump's kid is the poster boy for poaching in the world. And the father actually made a new rule so he could bring in these dead wild game animals, rare animals, into the United States. I said, you're a hypocrite. I may be a crook, but you're a hypocrite. You've got this foundation, and you're briefing Donald Trump, and you're not saying anything about his kid being a poacher. And then he said to me, I've worked for Donald Trump for 10 years, and I can only say good things about him. In a month, I may be free. That's what he said to me. So he's identified by a lot of people as the person who briefs the president. He said indirectly to people, and I've got two emails that he wrote to other people. One said that he was the gatekeeper. I'm the gatekeeper. You should know I'm the gatekeeper. And the other one was, I hold the keys. And he talked about understanding how intelligence works, because they were sort of saying Senator Reid wasn't briefed. And then Kit Green is on this email conversation. Kit Green says, well, actually, in fact, he was briefed. And then Ron says, well, it depends what you mean by briefing. And that's when he said, I have the keys, and congressmen and senators will come to me, and I tell them, I'll give you the keys. It's just information. It's just a location. And you can go there if you want, but you can get in a lot of trouble. And he said, most of them just allow me to hold the keys. So he has a very high position. You can't be in the intelligence for 31 years and not be some sort of high level person.
It's difficult territory because this is also opaque, and because that's the nature of intelligence work.
Exactly. And that's where he plays this game. So people will say, well, he's just a crazy guy in the CIA. You should not waste your time with him. And it's like, well, he's been in the CIA for 31 years. It would indicate that he's doing something that's sort of important, that he's not, a secretary. And that was my idea, was to find the highest level person you can. And I had determined that it may not be for sure that he's the briefer, but it did appear that he is the guy, because Art Lundahl said he'd briefed 3 presidents, and Kit Green said he talked to 3 or 4 presidents about UFOs. So this is the idea that this is this chain of command where they pass it off. And now Ron said in some of his postings on Open Minds Forum, and he's writing under a different name. They use different names. So he used to be called the Footman. His wife's the princess, and he's the Footman. So when he was on Open Minds Forum, he'd use the code word Footman. And everybody has a code name. That's why people can't follow Open Minds Forum, because you got to be on there for about a year to realize what all the names mean and all the acronyms and all that kind of stuff. And now he uses a thing called Real Pandolfi. And that's his code name he uses now. And then, of course, he says, that's not me. That's an intern that writes this stuff for me. And it's always this sort of, thing where you're playing this game and it goes round and round and round. I said, Ron, you've got a very distinctive writing style. This is not an intern. This is you writing, because I know your poetic style. And he has these poems, because they're writing poems and it's all rhymes and riddles and stuff. And I can tell his writing a mile away.
Weird. And who was this gentleman who told you to please take these, informed you, instructed you to please take these things down from your feeds?
Okay, this is Jack Sarfati, Dr. Jack Sarfati, who had his own experience when he was 13 years old. He had an engagement with a UFO where he got a phone call. It's like almost like the Uri Geller thing, if you know the Uri Geller story, with the metallic voices. So he gets a phone call. He's a kid about 13 years old. Lives in Brooklyn. The phone rings. He picks up the phone, and on the phone it says, "This is a computer on a flying saucer. Is this Jack Sarfati?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And then they said, "We have picked the 400 top people in the world, 400 people to give our information to. We want to give it to you, but you have to give your authorization to approve of this." And Jack had told the story numerous times. And he said, "I said in my head, no, and out of my mouth came yes." And he had a Kundalini awakening coming up his back, and he had this thing come through. And then he went and got his friends, and they said, "We're going to meet you on the patio. And in 20 years, you will meet the others, that are the other 400. So this is 1952, 1953 as the experience. 1972, 20 years later, he's reading the San Francisco newspaper, and the big story about Uri Geller is on there at Stanford Research Institute. So he phones up Stanford Research Institute, and he said, "I'd like to know about this. I'm going to London tomorrow, but I'd like to know about this." And they said, "Dr. Sarfati, we were hoping you would phone." And so his idea is that Uri Geller is one of the 400, Hal Puthoff is one of the 400, Russell Targ is one of the 400, and he's been given this information. He claimed that he got this download on how all this mathematical stuff. So when you see his mathematics, it's very, very complex. He's been doing this for years, posting this stuff, that he's figured out how the UFO flies and stuff. And that's his idea of what he's going to give to Donald Trump, all his mathematics, and Donald's going to understand this, and I can't understand it. Nobody can understand it. That's why I said, do you think Donald's going to understand this? And he said, yes, he will. So, okay, good. But he's a very prominent guy. He's got an email list, and all these high-level people come on there, and they chatter. You get a lot of the stuff in the background of the UFO field of these email lists that people get on, and they're exchanging ideas. And you have so if Kit Green's on an email list, well, you get on that email list because Kit Green knows what's going on. If Ron Pandolfi's on an email list, you get on that email list because Ron Pandolfi knows what's going on. And they may, be talking in rhymes and riddles, or may have to wait for a year for them to say something. But that's what I do is I sort of get these very high level people, and I don't watch the sighting stuff. I listen to experiencers because experiencers are important because they're interacting with the phenomena. The mistake we make in ufology is that we're watching the lights in the sky, and you can watch the lights in the sky for another 80 years and you're never going to learn a damn thing, or if it lands or anything like that. You've got to talk to the people who are interacting with the intelligence. Counting lights in the sky just says, yes, we're being engaged by something, and it probably isn't our stuff. That's all it tells you. Other than that, you've got to go to either get hardware or you've got to talk to the experiencers.
Just want to give you a commercial shout out for a second here. If people are interested in Grant's work, you have a ton of Kindle books. People can find your work online on Amazon. I'm looking at Contact Modalities, Managing Magic. There's Jimmy Carter, Triangles and Aliens, The Ride, Paranormal World of UFOs and Life Itself. And there are others, maybe like 6 or 7. You're quite a prolific writer. Has this been the bulk of your career commercially?
Well, you don't really make much money on books. So basically it's to record. We started a publishing company called It's All Connected, where all the books, you can link all the books in there. It's all connected. And the idea is it's all one thing. That's the basic message of the intelligence. It's all connected. It's all one thing. There's no separation. Everybody's connected. Everybody's together. And they're trying to give us the idea, quit separating. Quit saying it's me versus the black people or the Arabs or the Chinese, or you're all together. It's like Ronald Reagan's statement, how the world would unite if faced with a threat from an alien nation. We'd all realize we're just all one humanity and we're all children of God. It's that idea, and that's the message. So what we would do with these books is I would find someone who had a really interesting story, and I'd say to them, have you ever written this story down? And they go, no. I think you should write the story down, even for your kids, because the way it works now with self-publishing, you can publish a book and it costs you $5 to get it printed, and you can spend $5 to have it mailed to you, and you can put it on a counter and never sell your book. Just put it on your counter so that when you die, your kid finds the book and what's this? My dad wrote a book, and then read the book, because your kids won't listen to you now, but when you're dead, they'll read the book. And it's to record your story, because now you and I are in this thing, which is the biggest story that will ever happen in the history of the world. And you and I got to play. We could have been untouchables in the streets of Calcutta, spend our days in the junkyard looking for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow. We didn't get that role. We got the role to play in the Super Bowl of all stories. This is the biggest story, and we should be honored. So that's what I say to people. You got to write this down. I mean, write it down. Even if nobody sees it, you got to write it down. And then, so we would help people, show them how to self-publish, how to do it. Sometimes we'd spend too much time trying to help them do it and stuff like that. And that was the whole idea. So for me, it's sort of like I chronicle the ideas, and I basically get the idea of what the next book is going to be. So I chronicle the books, and that sort of helps me. It's almost like when you do lectures, it's the same thing, or do podcasts, is that you're learning stuff. So when you're doing a lecture, you have to put the slides in the right order. You got, and then you sort of, and then you, oh, what's this? I forgot about this. And then you look on the internet and you put another slide in, and you suddenly realize you've learned a lot just by putting all these slides together and how they fit together and getting it all in order. And you realize these two things are connected. You never realized it before. So that's the idea behind the books. I've done 22 books. 5 of them still haven't been published, but I just sort of write all my stuff. I don't do lectures anymore very much. And podcasts, I've sort of stopped unless I've got sort of a real big sort of person that I want to engage with. For example, I'm going to do a podcast in the next week with Dan Smith. He's the scribe. He's the guy that Ron Pandolfi, his friend Ron Pandolfi, and he'll tell the story that in 1991, he was approached by Ron Pandolfi, and he wanted to know about crop circles. And Ron told him, a little bit. And then he said, I'm going to Los Alamos to talk to the alien. And Dan Smith is a very wealthy guy. He's got 2 master's degree in physics. He's really out there. And he said, "You're going to Los Alamos to talk to the aliens?" Yeah. And so he goes off, and so Dan puts on the early internet. This is when it was just chat boards. There's no pictures on the internet, video, nothing like that. It was just chat boards. And he put on the internet. I was told by Ron Pandolfi, we have a phenomenology problem. And that's the bottom line. We have a phenomenology problem. It's not UFOs, it's phenomenology. And Ron has gone to Los Alamos to talk to the alien. And the rumor was at that time that there was a live alien. And so, of course, Ron comes back and he said, that created a lot of controversy. The next time that you do that, do not put my name and CIA in the same sentence. And he's continued to drop this stuff to Dan Smith for since 1991. And so I'm going to go through all the stories about Dan turning him in to CIA. He said he got an AG investigation, an Attorney General investigation at the CIA on Ron, because he said, Ron's a CIA guy. Why is he talking to me about UFOs? The CIA says there's no UFOs. So why is a CIA officer talking to me about UFOs? And they actually had an investigation on Ron, and the general came to Ron and said, we're going to do this investigation and stuff. He said, yeah, I'll answer all your questions, but I'm not going to talk about UFOs. You're not cleared to know. So it's this kind of thing where he's reported him. Ron knew before at 9/11 it was going to happen. And so when it happened, Dan immediately went to the FBI and reported his friend. He said, he told me it was going to happen before it happened. And the FBI did an investigation. So it's this whole career of all these stories that he was told by Ron Pandolfi, including the last story about how Ron told him there was going to be this meeting with Donald Trump. And he posted it, and how I reposted it, and how it exploded on the internet and stuff like that. So Dan is a very interesting guy. He's very eccentric. He likes to talk about eschatology, the end of the world. He believes he's the eschatologist for the U.S. government, and he talks a little bit about the Bible and all this kind of stuff. But if you get the UFO stuff, he is the scribe. He knows all the stories, and he's got almost like a photographic memory. He remembers exactly what was said. He's not. Mm-hmm. He doesn't make any mistakes when he retells these stories. So those are the kind of podcasts I do. But usually the books is just to record what I've done. And I've even got all the books. We're putting them all together on one thumb drive where I'll actually search. Like I'll get a quote that I remember somebody saying, and I go, what book did I put that quote in? Now I can, with the search engines, you can actually go in there and I can actually search, and it'll pull in the book which book that comes from. So I find it very useful for research purposes.
That's smart.
Because I've destroyed all my files. I've actually put all my files online from 50 years, and because I had to move, and so I didn't want to drag all the files, so I put it all, no blacked out stuff, nothing, just as it is, and for the world, because that's what I think is very important to people. Is what's happening is the phenomenon is doing what I'm calling the Jesus circus. So what it'll do is it'll do the UFO thing, put the lights on. It'll do crop circles. It'll do cattle mutilations to tell you it's downwind and downstream from nuclear power activities. When they do cattle mutilations, they do it very ugly mutilations because they want you to bring a camera. They want you to talk about it. They take a heart out of a cow without an incision because they want you to go, how did they get that heart out of the cow? This is unbelievable. And they just want this awe and curiosity, because when you're in awe and curiosity, that's when you do an investigation. If you think you got it all figured out, there's no point to investigate. And they'll do all this sort of stuff. They're just doing this weird stuff, this paranormal stuff, the hitchhiker, all that stuff is just a game. It's a game to get you to go, what is going on? And people are doing investigations, and you and I talk about it. We put it on podcasts, and people say nothing's happening. And I say, yeah, stuff is happening. In 1975 is a different world. Now you can go to China. You can go to the deepest, darkest areas of Africa. You can go to Brazil. You can go anywhere in the world, and you can say, Area 51. They go, I know what that is. Near-death experience. I know what that is. They'll say UFO. I know what that is. The consciousness is rising. People will know. And what Max Planck, who had quantum physics, the guy who invented quantum physics, what he said, because he had the same problem where nobody believed him. And he said, science does not advance by you convincing your opponent that he's wrong. Science advances when your opponent dies.
One funeral at a time.
One funeral at a time. The new generation is not offended with the idea. And that's the same thing. We complain in the UFO field, and we don't realize the consciousness is rising. People are like, now people say, oh, we don't want this catastrophic disclosure. And I say, what do you mean catastrophic disclosure? What are you talking about? Oh, they're going to release the fact they got bodies and crafts. I said, I wrote an article before the New York Times article was published. that talked about the fact that the government was investigating UFOs, and it was called the 64 Reasons They Decided Not to Tell You the Truth. And I had the stock market's going to melt down, people are going to jump off bridges, all this kind of stuff, all these fear things. And what happened when the New York Times published that article and said, yeah, it's actually true. The government is investigating UFOs. They're real. Nothing. Nobody did anything. It was like nothing. And it's the same thing now. They say, oh, it's going to be catastrophic exposure. I said, what could be catastrophic? They're going to say, oh, we got the bodies in cracks. And everybody's going to say, I've heard about this for years. I know that. Well, that's no big deal. Nothing's going to happen. People are not amazed. So that's what they're doing this with this soft disclosure. They put it out, they pull it back. They put it out, they pull it back. And nobody can confirm it. Like you and I are saying, does Ron actually work for CIA? We really don't know. But you and I are talking about what's Ron saying? And that sticks in people's heads. They remember, oh, Ron said, he's going to Los Alamos and all these different stories. And that's what's happening. The consciousness is rising. And then at the end, it's like 95%. And it's when I say to people, when did gay marriage become acceptable? And people go, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It just happens. Nobody's going to know what happened. That's what's happening. If the aliens wanted to disclose, the aliens would land on the White House lawn. If the president wanted to disclose, they would have a news conference. They don't want to disclose. The aliens don't want to disclose. They're doing this slow release where they're acclimatizing people, moving them along, where they gradually learn and learn and learn. And it all happens by people talking. The more people talk, the more people hear Area 51 and Ron Pandolfi's name. I even said Ron Pandolfi the other day. I said, Ron, when I'm done with you, it's going to be like, you're going to be like Harry Potter. Everybody's going to know your name because nobody knows who he is now, but we're talking about it and people are starting to ask it. And there's all this, I think on Twitter in the first 2 hours, I posted this threat that came against me. There was 10,000 hits on Twitter in 2 hours. And it all comes down to Ron Pandolfi's name. So now Ron Pandolfi is going to come to the surface and people are going to say, Ron, yeah, I know Ron Pandolfi. I've heard the stories about him. That's what's happening. The consciousness is rising as we tell stories.
I'd like to jump in full throttle to phenomenon speculation with you. But first, I only really have one important question for you today, which is in the 50 years of researching, how have you navigated intellectually the complex and sometimes contradictory field of information here? Like what kind of rules of thinking do you have for yourself to judge the credibility of sources or information? And are there times that you feel you've learned some information which later turned out not to be accurate? And just like, how do you approach careful thought in this space?
Okay, well, again, it comes back to this idea of finding the highest level person you can find, the president. So I had the president's website for maybe 25 years. I ran all the stories about what the president had seen, who presidents talked about, and were there investigations, stuff like that. And I worked that, but a lot of my stuff has been led. Is woo as that sounds. I've been given information. Like for example, the first book that I did was a book that where the guy did the film where the thing jumped 5,000 feet in the air. The guy that was on the film had never shot a camera before in his life. The film crew had been told, you're not going out anymore. No more UFOs. We're not paying any more overtime. You guys want to go, you can go on your own time. So they took this guy out who never shot a camera before, and they almost got it the night before. It was on the ground the night before. So this guy was looking through the viewfinder, and I interviewed him, and he says, I was looking through the viewfinder, and this thing was 8.25 miles because knew where the thing landed because it left radiation marks there. And so he's there, and he said, they got something the night before, and I could see this thing. It was glowing up. And it would glow back down, it would glow up, and it was down on the horizon. And he said, next time it glows up, I'm going to shoot the camera. And it was almost like the UFO said, you ready? Get ready. And he pushed the trigger, and this thing jumped up in the air. And as soon as I heard that, I went, that wasn't an accident. There's no way that was an accident. And then I'm thinking, because I didn't go in February of 1975. I had no interest in UFOs. I only went because they got the film. And it was like the only time UFOs ever been caught on the ground, jumping off the ground by a film crew. And that was like because they needed me to go out. And I started to get this idea that this was my mission, that I was being given these ideas. For example, I was good friends with Chris Bledsoe. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Bledsoe.
I just read UFO of God this week.
Yeah. So this is a best-selling book. So I wrote about him in Alien Bedtime Stories. I wrote about him in 2014, this whole story. And I have a lot of stuff in there that is not in his present book. But anyway, so Chris phones me up one day. This is about 2014. And he said, I've got a message from you from the Guardians. And I've gotten 3 different messages from contactees who said, the aliens have a message for you. And this was one. So he said to me, I said, oh, really? And he calls them the Guardians. He said, the Guardians have a message for you. I said, great. What's the message? He said, they want you to know the messages in the music. And I go, well, Chris, you may be talking to the wrong guy, Chris, because Grant don't do music. I've never listened to, I don't listen to music. My father built theater organs. My mother was a church organist for 40 years. My sisters played in a group. They tried to get me to take piano lessons. No way. I had no interest. I'm a podcast guy. I don't listen to music, whatever. And so then Chris kept talking. He said, well, your songs you should listen to is Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. I go, oh, whatever, Chris. And then he said, the other song you should listen to is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. And I go, Neil Young is involved in this? And he said, yeah, Neil Young. I'm pretty sure. And you should put if you look at the lyrics to After the Gold Rush, it's just unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. And then what you see is a number of contactees who sang that song, people, major musicians who sang that song, and they were all contactees as well. And it talks about the silver seed coming down and taking the chosen ones to a different star system. And the chosen one is Yvonne Smith's book called the Abducted People, the Chosen Ones. And this is this whole idea of mission, this idea. And so Neil Young, the catch with Neil Young was, I said, Neil Young is involved with this thing? And he said, yeah. I said, Chris, I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. It is the one city in Canada where even Canadians don't want to visit. It's the coldest city in the world. Nobody wants to be here. And Neil Young grew up here. So that's what got me down the rabbit hole. I said, Neil Young's involved? And I went and looked at the lyrics. I went, wow. And then I realized that Patti Smith, who was the first woman to sing on Saturday Night Live, had sang the song as well. And then I'm going, I knew she was an experiencer. She actually said she doesn't believe she's from this planet. She said, it's foreign to me. My parents didn't make any sense to me. I was tall, none of my parents. And she basically came saying she came from another planet. And you get all these. So I wrote that book called Tuned In, the Paranormal World of Music, of all these bizarre experiencers who sang After the Gold Rush and people who got downloads and how many of them had UFO sightings. This is unbelievable. It's almost like at one point I thought they had every major musician in the world had a UFO sighting or had some sort of encounter. It was just totally bizarre. So I've sort of followed those things when I wrote the book on Apports and manifestations, like things that experiencers, psychics, mediums will talk about things falling out of the ceiling and things appearing and disappearing and flying across the room and stuff like that. And I got onto that whole thing. And the reason I got on because Ray Hernandez, who had run the Free Foundation, who went after 4,200 experiencers, I said to him, we're at LAX airport and we're waiting for the Uber and it took a long time. So I said, Ray, you got 4,200 people you've investigated. And it's the same idea. Like, who's the best guy? I haven't got time to talk to 4,200 guys. Who's your best guy? I'd like to talk to your best guy. It's like the president, the guy that knows the most. And he said, that's Alberto. And he starts talking about Alberto. He's this and this and that. And his wife has got experiences. And this guy is a federal officer and his wife is a psychiatrist or something like that, really high level. And then he said, he's got these Apports and they fall out of the ceiling and there's swords and there's stuff. And I go, they're what? He said, oh yeah, a sword. There's a sword fell out of the ceiling? He said, yeah. And he says, he shows me this photograph and he's got these things on, he's got shelves and all these Apports that have appeared in his house and stuff like that. And I go, that is the weirdest. I've been in ufology for like 40 years. I've never heard of this. This is the weirdest thing I ever heard. So I was obsessed with it.
Side note, apportation in psi research circles is the sudden appearance of an object or disappearance of an object. Is that right?
Yeah, they have all these technical terms. Like they have one term for it coming, one term for it going. I call them all apports and manifestations. It's sort of this idea where things are appearing and disappearing, and it happens in all paranormal phenomena. People think it's just like in mediumship, but UFO people, for example, I'll say to UFO people, I'll be doing an interview with some guy, like the one guy I said, hey, you ever have anything fly around the room or appear and disappear? And he goes, can you hang on for a sec? He leaves, comes back on the camera with this pile of stuff. He starts telling me, this disappeared, and just really weird. And again, It's the same thing. It's like to get you to go like, why? How did that happen? Because you're never going to figure it out. Paranormal phenomena, you never figure out. There's never an answer to it. But it's just to drag you down the road, drag you into the rabbit hole. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you to realize there's more to the world than you think that's on there. So with the apportation thing, I got so fascinated with this. I got on the internet and I watched an interview with a guy named Stanley Krippner, who he did dream research on paranormal dream research, but he also was the expert on Apports, and he was being interviewed by Jeffrey Mishlove. So he's doing the interview, and then he says, I thought, this is pretty cool. And then he talks about this psychic in Brazil who had all these apportations, and he had some photographs of them and stuff like that. And he said, but the thing was, someone broke into my house and stole all the Apports that I had, and all I got left is the photographs. And then he said, so to protect this, what I did for the next Apports is the ones I investigated and gathered. I sent them to a university in Canada. I sent them to the University of Manitoba. And I went, I've been at the University of Manitoba for 37 years. I was a manager there. I worked there. And I go, wow, what's the chances that I'm interested in this apportation thing now? And there happens to be an apportation museum in my university. And that's how I got the Apport book. I started reading the Apport book. And I found all these synchronicities that sort of lead me into the next book, the next book, the next book. And that's sort of the way it's gone. But it always comes down to this thing of listening to the experiencers, the people who know. So you have the people who believe. You'll always get people on the internet, like people say, this guy's got a PhD. We make the mistake in ufology. The guy's got a PhD. Let's bring him to the conference. It's like, no, let's not bring him to the conference. PhD, when I was at the university, it was called piled higher and deeper. We always had this idea that you got a bachelor's degree and you didn't want to go to work. So you instead of your parents were paying for your university. So what you say is, oh, I'll get a master's degree and then I'll make more money. So they get a master's degree and then they try to get a job and nobody will pay them because they got no experience. They get a master's degree and they're not going to pay you for a master's degree and you got no experience. And then they go, what the hell am I going to do now? I got a master's degree. And they go, oh, I'll get a PhD and I'll teach it. And that's our impression of the thing. And I worked as a bartender for the Faculty Club Lounge, which was a synchronistic job that taught me more than anything. The guy was a guy had 2 PhDs that taught me to do the bartending. He said, Grant, remember one thing about all these guys that come in here, professors, vice presidents, presidents, and stuff like that. Just remember one thing: when they've had one too many drinks, they're just like any other drunk on the street. So I was into UFOs, and I would have discussions with deans of departments. And the one guy, I remember, he was in plant science. He was the dean of plant science, and he used to like talk UFOs with me. But he wanted to play the skeptic. And to me, the skeptic is not somebody who's more rational than you, smarter than you. A skeptic is only one thing. Skeptic is someone who has a very firm worldview, and you got to move them off that worldview because they'll say, it doesn't agree with my worldview, so I'm going to be skeptical, and I'm not going to let it in until you can prove to me that it belongs to my worldview. So he would argue with me, and I said to him at one point, I said, what do you mean? You're a plant scientist. You're dean of plant science. What do you know about UFOs? And he goes, nothing. I said, exactly. And that was the whole thing. You realize that when a guy's got say a PhD in chemistry, it's biochemistry. And then it's some little tiny aspect of biochemistry where he spent 3 years working on a thesis. He's got this very limited thing. And a guy in the chemistry, my office used to be in the chemistry building. I knew that the guy in the chemistry building never went into the building where the mathematicians were. He never went into the biology building. He stayed in his own little building, and they had their own little groups. And people think that because you got a PhD, you know everything, and you don't. I even had a friend who had a PhD in mechanical civil engineering, and he used to do roads and all this sort of stuff. And he came from China, and he was very, very smart guy mathematically. He could do calculations in his head and stuff like that. And I went to see him. He was at the University of Wyoming, and he had to actually leave the country because his English was just not good enough to teach. So he was there, and I went to him to see him, and I was going through the West Coast, and I went to see him, and I said, "Hey, Mingland, what's in your tap? You got no water in your tap." And he says, "Oh, turn the shutoff valve underneath." And I turned the shutoff valve, and the water was pouring out. I go, "Mingland, what the heck? Why don't you put a washer in this stupid thing? It's totally gone." And he said, "I don't know how to do that." And I said, "You don't know how to do it. You got a PhD in civil engineering." And that was the whole thing. People think that you're smart, you can do anything, but it's the old idea. If you got a PhD in some sort of thing, it doesn't mean you can fix your car. It doesn't mean you can do heart surgery. So you got to find people in that field. And the people that are the best are the people who are actually having the experiences. They're not believing. They can actually tell you what happened. And then you start to get these patterns where the one book I wrote, which was synchronistically happened again, it was the book that I wrote about consciousness. When I got into the consciousness thing, I had this download experience watching Colin Andrews give a lecture in 2012 when it came into my head with absolute certainty. This has got to do with consciousness. And this is the answer. Don't question this or whatever. And so I started to talk about consciousness. And in 2013, a woman in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was lecturing said, "Oh, are you still going to talk to Pam Dupuy?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." I thought, "Oh, I must have agreed to talk to this woman." So she said, "Oh, Pam's coming to the house on Monday." So I'm at this house, and Pam comes to the door, and she's like 75 years old, and her partner's there, and they come walking in, and she says, "What did Stacy tell you about me?" I said, "Nothing. She just said I'm supposed to talk to you." "That's good." Sits down, she starts telling me, I'm a remote ear for the government, and I'm psychic, and I've been abducted, and yada yada, and you heard all this stuff, and it's like, okay, whatever, just tell me all the stories. And then she says to me, she says, "Oh, and I was flying the craft last night." And I go, "You are what?" And she says, "I was flying the craft last night." And I'm looking at her, and it's like a 75-year-old lady. And all I could think in my head was, like Saudi Arabian women cannot drive a car unless there's a man in the car. And they let you fly. I said, they let you fly the flying saucer? Like no insurance, no nothing, with training, whatever. She says, yeah, I've flown 3 different models. And I go, 3 different models? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, how do you fly a flying saucer? And she says, you do it with your mind. And I go, oh, then I suddenly realized why they put me in contact with her. And I realized this idea that came with this woman, that's how you move the craft around. And then suddenly all these people started to appear. Chris Bledsoe, I'm talking to him and he said, oh, I've flown the craft. I said, Chris, you flew the craft? And he said, yeah, I flew the craft. I said, stop right there, Chris. I'm going to phone you on Skype. I'm going to interview the whole thing. Don't tell me anything now. I'm going to phone. Okay, Chris, tell me, how do you fly the craft? Chris said, oh, it was there, and it was the door opened, and I went inside the craft, and the craft was the size of a football field inside, and I looked outside, and it was only 30 feet, and I looked inside, it was the size of a football field, and I went in, and the guardians were standing there. They were 7 feet tall. He describes all that, and he said, they said, put your hand on this beehive, and there was these. He talks about these hexagons in the wall, small hexagons in the wall, and he says they tell him put his hand on this beehive in the middle of a pedestal in the middle on this beehive. And the thing was that the 35 people I interviewed, 36 people I interviewed about this, nobody touched the same thing. It was the weirdest thing. Everybody would touch something different in the craft, but everybody touched something in the craft. And it was the idea was the craft is conscious. This is the future of AI. The craft is a conscious, it's alive. And when you touch the craft, you become one with the craft and whatever you think is what the craft does. So he puts his hand on, he said it was like it looked like plastic, black plastic. Took his hand off the black plastic, and it was like a CD-ROM where you get the colors of the light flashing through it, and you could see his hand where the hand was. And he said suddenly these hexagons started to become bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're spinning. And he said all of a sudden, boom, the window opened up. And he said that he was above the Cape Fear River where he got abducted, and he's cross-legged on the floor, flying a couple inches off the Cape Fear River, going, Yahoo! And he's flying, and he's using his mind to fly the craft. So I started to run up again, and I went to Whitley Strieber because I started to realize there's these patterns that experiences, when you listen to enough experiences, they will tell you the pattern. I'm talking to Whitley Strieber, and I said, Whitley, you've been on the craft? And he said, yeah. I said, Whitley, people are telling me the story on the craft where they're standing there and there's somebody behind them. The key one was Jim Semivan, was this high-level CIA guy who had the beings in his room. And they asked him, was there telepathy? And he said, yeah, that was the weirdest part. He said, there was somebody behind me while this incident was going on, and they had this guardian type thing going on about it. And I go, guardian type thing? That's a guardian angel standing behind him. So I asked the interviewer, I said, ask Jim, was it left side or right side? Because the guardian angel is standing on your left side. And he didn't, I never figured it out. But anyway, he said, had this guardian type thing going on. And then I realized, hey, this U.S. Air Force colonel told me he had somebody standing behind him. And I remember all these people talking about somebody standing behind him. I couldn't see what they were. And the people are telling them what to do. And so then I said to Whitley, I said, hey, Whitley, you ever had anybody standing behind you on the craft and they're sort of telling you what to do, but you can't see them? And he goes, all the time. He said, I was standing there and I was going to steal a craft. And I was sitting at the panel board and I said, I'd like to steal this craft. He said, somebody suddenly behind him, somebody started laughing. And it was this telepathic thing. So that's the patterns you sort of get as you realize, or that the idea on the craft, this consciousness interaction, where, for example, my friend Ron Johnson, who's a Mormon guy out of Utah, had flown the craft. And he said to me, another important thing that a lot of them said was, they asked him, where would you like to go, Ron? And he said, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance, which would be probably from us 70,000 light years or whatever it is away. So he said, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance. And they said this key words. It said that other people had said, Ron, it is within you. Go within yourself. When you can imagine it, then we'll go there. So he's sitting in his chair and he said, he imagined the Milky Way and he said, 1 second of intense G-force. And he said, he looked, the window opened up. And there was the Milky Way off in the distance. Another woman said the same thing. They said to her, it is within you. Go within yourself. When you can imagine it, then push the button. And she pushed this button. And she said they were on the other side of the universe instantaneously, 1 second. And this is this whole idea that it's all one thing. And for example, Stephen Greer would use the expression, you see Sufi expression, you see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. This is this idea, or out-of-body experience people say, when you go out of your body, you're not going anywhere. You're going inside, you're not going outside. And Ron Pandolfi has even hinted about doing an interview where he's going to talk about this, that it happens at the quantum level, that you're not going anywhere. Everything is one thing here and now. There's no time and there's no space. It's all here, and it's all happening within your mind. It's all this mind stuff. And that would be one of the main reasons that there's no disclosure, because you cannot drop that on people. People who, 54% of people are reading at a grade 6 level and stuff like this. They've never read a book. They've never been out of their county and stuff like that. They have this very Judeo-Christian view of the world, and you're going to drop this on them. That, as Jim Semivan said, there does not appear to be any there. And I say to people, this guy had a 6 to 8 hour briefing on UFOs inside the Central Intelligence Agency by guys who he said had as many clearance tickets as he had and who had non-escort badges for the CIA. They could walk around the CIA anywhere. They were very high level people who brought him into a room and for 6 to 8 hours scared the living daylights out of him about UFOs. So he's gotten the briefing and he said, there does not appear to be any there. And I say to people, so what's he talking about? There does not appear to be any there. And it's the idea that it's happening inside your head, this idea. And it's just so far beyond anything we believe. And the beings are sort of moving us there. So they gave me these people who would tell me these stories about, going inside themselves, imagining it, and instantly moving. Numerous people told me that. Instantly moving from one place to another, or going through the earth and stuff like that. And you realize that this may not be the physical phenomenon people think it is. It's more this consciousness phenomenon, which is exactly what I got in my download in 2012, watching Colin Andrews give the lecture, where it said this is consciousness. And all it did in 2012, it took 3 things that I already knew and it put them together like that. And it was like, oh, they showed me before I was born, this whole thing. And I was like, I forgot. And then they showed me again. Oh, yeah, I remember now. And it was like, the one thing was the Canadian government wrote a document in 1950. It's a top secret document. One of the top Canadian guy went to the United States and he came back and he wrote a top secret memo, which said, we were told I went to ask the American officials and I was told the following things. Flying saucers are real. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States, rated higher than the H-bomb, which wouldn't be developed for 2 years. It's of tremendous significance to the Americans. And there's a group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who are trying to figure out the modus operandi of the saucers. Then what popped into my head was the very next line. It said, we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. The Americans aren't doing very well because they've said if we're working on the problem, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. So in 1950, 2 years before Adamski, the first guy to talk to an alien, came forward and said, I'm talking to aliens, they're telepathic. 1952, 1950 already, Wilbur Smith had said there's mental phenomena. So how would the Americans know that mental phenomena was part of the UFO? It was just UFOs flying around. Nobody was talking to aliens. And the reason was because the story is now, used to be Roswell was 4 dead aliens. Now the story was 3 dead aliens and 1 live alien. And the alien was talking in people's heads. So they knew there was this connection. The second thing that popped in my head at the same time was Dr. Eric Walker. This guy was chairman of the Institute for Defense Analysis, and he was talking in rhymes and riddles to us and stuff like that. And he knew everything. And he said, why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? So at one point during one interview with a guy from Great Britain, he said, hey, let me ask you a question. The guy go, what? What do you know about ESP? And the guy says, oh, not really, didn't really know anything. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken into the control group, the guys that run the show. You will not be taken into the control group. Very few people understand how it works. Then 2 years after that was 1991. 1993, Jan Hartson, who runs the MUFON, the big MUFON group, is at a lecture at UCLA. Ben Rich, who runs Lockheed Skunk Works, is lecturing. Ben Rich gives this joke about when you have the technology to take ET home. Jan Hartson had an experience at 9 years old in a backyard with a flying saucer like 20 feet away. And he's obsessed with flying saucers. He got a PhD, he got an engineering degree so he could build a flying saucer. And he suddenly got Ben Rich there. Ben Rich knows what's going on. Ben Rich is leaving the building, is running after Ben. Ben, I need to know. I've been obsessed with my whole life. How do UFOs get here? What's the propulsion system? And Ben turns around and says exactly word for word what Walker said. Let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And Jan Hartson says, it means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben Rich said, that's how it works. Walks out, gets in his car and drives away. So this is the whole thing. It was this idea, and it was like absolute certainty. This is how it works. It's this, and I didn't realize, because in 2012, I always say, I couldn't have spelled consciousness. I couldn't care less. I had no interest in it. But when it came to me, then I realized it was more complex. It was non-local. And as I studied it, the consciousness became more elaborate, and to the point where now I would say my view of the universe is, what I'm saying now is, you got to look at the nature of reality. It's not starting with UFOs. Start with the nature of reality and move to the UFOs. And the nature of reality to me is that God did not create the heaven and the earth. God created the sparks of the divine. And it's the sparks of the divine that are creating the heavens and earth out of consciousness. Everything is made out of consciousness. It's compressed consciousness. It's all made out of consciousness. And that's what we're doing. We're developing big buildings, new ideas, and the world's getting more complex, and the universe is getting more complex. And that's basically what happened. And that's, you'll see a lot of the experiences, we'll talk about that as well, that's what it is. And all these people are at a higher vibratory level. Or Tesla said, when you go to vibration and energy, then you'll start to learn more than you've learned in the last 100 years. This idea that we're leading on perception. So we perceived the world was flat, wrong. We perceived that the sun went around the earth, wrong. We perceived everything was solid, wrong. And the perception, I basically say, all the perceptions are going to be wrong. Like, we think there's color. There is no color. We now know this. It's happening inside your head. There is no color. All there is these electromagnetic waves that are moving around, and the color doesn't exist. And even in your sight, there's blind spots in your sight that your mind fills in these blind spots because you have a retina. The nerve goes through the retina. There's a blind spot, and it just gets more complex and more complex. And when you go down to the micro level, you get, the human cell is creating millions of proteins per second. And you realize the world is getting more complex and more complex. And same thing with the UFO thing. The more you look at the UFO thing, the more complex it gets, and you just become in awe of all the stories that people are telling and stuff like that. And that's all this is we're gradually moving to that thing. And if you don't learn it in this lifetime, that's fine. You'll come back in next lifetime, and then you get all these ideas that we came in, which is sort of my idea after all these synchronicities, was that this was what I intended to do. That you and I may have had a meeting before we were born, and you said, I'm going to do a podcast, you're going to come on a podcast, we're going to raise consciousness, that we all came in at this time, because people will complain, oh, it's terrible, the world's going to hell in a handbasket or whatever. But if reincarnation is a fact, then you and I both agreed to come in at this time, in this place, in the middle of whatever mess we are complaining about, in the middle, and maybe we came for a particular reason. We came to try to do the mess. That we all said, they said they're going to do this UFO thing, they're going to come in, raise consciousness and stuff like that. Who wants to do? Oh, I'll volunteer for that. And you get all these volunteers that go in to do this, and we're all playing a role, because people forget that you are not the body. You are a puppet, and that you're an etheric being that Chris Bledsoe will describe, that you're an etheric being, and that you go into the puppet, you play the puppet for 70 years or whatever, and because you played King Henry VIII in grade 12 high school, does not mean you're not King Henry VIII. No, you're playing King Henry VIII, and you go off stage, and then you come back on stage to do another thing, and that's what this whole thing is about. And it just becomes more complex, and that's when you start talking to experiencers, when you talk to, for example, Chris Bledsoe, who is a Pentecostal, straight Christian Pentecostal, where his wife didn't cut her hair and stuff like that, very conservative, where suddenly he's under regression in 2008. And they say to him, Chris, when did you first meet these beings? He said, they've been with me since before I was born. And then the regressionist said, like in your last lifetime? And Chris said, yes. So if the being has been in your last lifetime, then everything changes. It's a whole new world. And that's what I say, you got to see your perception. So people see aliens, and then you start looking at the aliens, and you go to Jacobs. So Jacobs has, where the alien does this, what's called a mind meld, where they look into your eyes very close. They're very close to you. And Jacobs always says to them, so is he breathing? And the person goes, no, he's not breathing. And then the question is, so he's not breathing. Is he actually an alien? And you get Betty Andreasen. She had her experience 1946. I interviewed her maybe 5 years ago and asked her and her husband, both had their experience with an alien in 1946. I said, hey, Betty, did the alien ever get any older? You went from this little tiny girl to this old grandmother. Did the aliens ever get any older? And their husband said, no, but aliens live a long time. And they try to justify it. Or if you take a look at aliens, they don't eat. They don't have, people ask people, hey, do you have any clothes on? They go, no, I don't think so. No, he didn't have any clothes on. I said, do you have any sex organs? They go, no, come to think of it, no, he didn't. I said, don't you think that's kind of weird? Didn't have a sex organ? I mean, if he's a reproductive person from another planet, he's got a sex organ. No, I don't think that. And I said, did he have any wrinkles? No, his skin looked like plastic. It was no. And then it was like, did he ever get any older? And they'd all say, no, I never got any older. And then did you see him in your last lifetime? And some people remember that. And then you have the thing, what about his legs? They have no muscles. You cannot move muscles. You cannot move legs without muscles. The aliens have sticks. So it's like a thing where it's like you look at a photo and you say, oh, it's a UFO photo, and then you blow it up and take the digital and you find the string. That's what it is. It's like you're looking at the alien, you think you're looking at an alien, and the alien never gets any older. It doesn't go to the bathroom. It doesn't seem to breathe. It doesn't have a mouth. All this kind of stuff, and you're going, what are we really dealing with? And it's like you find the string and you say, hey, this ain't an alien. He's pretending to be an alien. So I would ask experiencers. I'd say, hey, you ever asked the alien if he was actually an experiencer, an alien? And if you've never interviewed, you should try to interview her, is Sherry Wilde. So Sherry Wilde wrote a book called The Forgotten Promise, where the aliens say to her, Sherry, did you forget the promise that you made? You promised to come in here. You promised to write this book. You promised to spread the message, whatever. And she had a really tough time with this whole thing. She hated it. She still hates it. And anyway, she's getting her book, and her daughters tried to get a court injunction to stop her from publishing this book. And she was at the publisher, and the publisher said to her, hey, Sherry, you said that Da, which is the being, everybody has one being. So it's a spirit guide thing. It's an alien or is a spirit guide? Because it's always one. I say, hey, you're dealing with an alien. What was the name of the being? Everybody always deals with one alien. There's lots of aliens around, but one that they're dealing with that talks to them. And it happens with everybody. And they always have a name. So her being's name was Da. So he said, well, Da said he's a gray, right? Yeah, he's a Zeta. Yeah, he's a Zeta. And he said he's from Andromeda. He says, well, yeah, he's from Andromeda. And the publisher says, well, Sherry, he can't be from Andromeda. He's got to be from Zeta Reticuli. If he's a Zeta, he's got to be from Zeta Reticuli. You better ask him. So she says, yeah, I'm going to ask him. So next time Doc comes, she says, okay, so what's the deal here? Are you actually an alien? And to quote him, he said, no, that would not best describe who I actually am. I am an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. And she says, well, how come you come as this ugly looking gray thing? And he said, ugly looking gray thing. This is very practical. We use this. It's easier than a human body. It's very practical. You think we look ugly? And she said, well, you scare me. You wipe my memory. Every time you come here, you wipe my memory and I don't remember. And then you scare me because you look so scary. And he said, Sherry, have you ever looked in the mirror? And she says, what do you mean? He says, well, you got those big teeth, Sherry. When you smile, we think you're going to eat us. And so I asked one girl, we had her publish two books of hers. The first abductee, she was 3 months before Betty and Barney Hill. Her name is Nancy Tremaine. And I said, Nancy, ask your guy, is he an alien? And then he said, we are neither alien to this planet or any other planet. And then I had two beings in Great Britain who wanted me to interview them. So through this channel person, I went and I said, okay, first question, are you an alien? And then they said, would you like us to be aliens? We could do that if you want. We could actually take you to our planet. But no, we're not aliens. We've always been here. You're the visitor. So and that's the thing, is you get a person and you ask. I've never had anybody yet that comes back where the alien actually will maintain, once you confront them, that they're actually an alien. They say, no, I'm an etheric being. Or the one guy out of Israel, Yossi Ronan is his name. We helped him publish his book. It was a best-selling book. And it was called One, the idea of one. And the beings told him, when we come into your world, we take on a form. We have to take on a form to operate it in your universe, but we don't need it. You can do the same thing. You just don't realize it.
So this idea of universality and connectedness of everything, do you think it precludes the concept of, say, multiple visiting species? Like, I'm hearing you drive sort of away from an extraterrestrial hypothesis. Is that how you feel about the situation after all these interviews?
So I would say that if you have other planets, you can have other species, but I don't think they can get off the planet. The only way you can get off the planet is to go like to the fourth or fifth level, where you're not physical anymore, where you're able to sort of transcend that. So that's what I believe these people are flying around, that they may come from some sort of place, but they've transcended into the fourth or fifth where they don't need a body. If you've got a body, it's the old idea, you can't get here from there. So you may have people on other planets that are like us, where they're physical and they may look different than us. But the people that are moving around, because when you talk to them, they talk about this etheric being thing, or they'll talk about where an alien he'll be a ball of light, and then he'll turn into an alien being. Or if another woman was Sherry Hansen, who was being taught by the Greys, and they said to her, we got someone to play with you, and it's going to be your son. And she said, I'm only 8 years old. I can't have a son. And she started crying, and they said, no. And then they said, the sun's coming out. It was a blue ball of light. And she said, well, what's this? I can't play with this. But she started playing with it, and it turned out it was her son. She was a red ball of light, and he was a blue ball of light. So the concept still goes back that you got to remember the what I was told when I did my psychedelic book when I did the psychedelic version. At one point, they said to me, I thought it was an Indian. I thought they were trying to tell me I was some sort of Indian god or something, but they said, Grant, don't you remember who you actually are? And this is what I would say to experiencers, is remember who you actually are. You're not the puppet on the stage, because people will describe, and I'm a big fan of Dr. Michael Newton, who did the stuff on Life Between Lives, where he regressed 7,000 people. He would regress them to their last life, let them die in that life, and they would go into the spirit world, and they'd say, okay, where are you going? Through the tunnel. Okay, what's happening now? All my relatives coming to make me. Okay, now what's happening now? Now I'm in this thing, and we're going down this river, and I can see these spirit or these soul groups and stuff on the side, and you go back to your soul group, and there's that whole idea that you're actually like this etheric being, like a ball of light or an energy, a spark of the divine, and you'll always go back to that. And so the people that are coming to us have elevated to this world where they can move into the world. Or Bashar says, we come to your dreams because now you're in our world. So they can come into our world. We can't go into their world because we have this belief about the whole idea that you are physical, that we can't transcend the physical. And as long as you believe that, you're never going to transcend the physical. It's the whole idea that consciousness is creating things, that whatever you believe is what the idea that nothing is seen until you observe it. It doesn't become physical until you observe it. It's this idea that we're creating, or as Seth says, you manifest everything around you. There is no other rule. This idea that we're actually creating this world around it, whereas it looks like it's physical or whatever, but we don't realize it's all happening inside our head. And that's not really what's out there. It's just a creation that is inside our head. So the beings that we're dealing with, I started with extraterrestrials, and the more I believe this is a spiritual thing, where you'll actually get, like, for example, you get on board the ship, and I think 70% of all experiencers say they've actually interacted with a dead person. 70%, it's like huge. Or 40% had the experience I had, where they were in their experience and they knew the answer to everything in the universe that was taken away from them, that they weren't allowed to bring it back. And near-death experience people say, 31% of them say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe, which means the answer to everything in the universe is out there. And it's the ability to access that, to get out of this physical, shut down the left brain, get into the field, get the material, bring it back like some inventors do. And the people that are there, the more I look at it, the more it looks like it's a spiritual thing where they've transcended this, and they're coming. Like people say, why are they here? Well, they're here because it's altruistic. We're the only people that aren't altruistic. They're very altruistic. You take a look at they're very right-brained. They're not left-brained. Left-brained is about me. It's about how many toys do I have? How many $1 billion do I have and stuff like that. They're very right-brained. You take a look at them. They have no clothes. They have no designer stuff. They have no crystal chandeliers. They don't seem to go to the bathroom. They don't seem to eat. They just sit there and work all the time. It's very clear their ship has nothing around it except for the tables and stuff like that. And then you wonder, like, what are we really dealing with? And the more you look at it, the more you realize that this is something more than aliens. At first impression, it looks like aliens, but when you start to realize, and I made a list of all the things that don't make sense when you start looking at an alien, that it can't be an alien. There's no way that you can have that, although they can have the bodies. So it's like in a seance, they can make a live turtle, appear in a seance and drop on the table, which happened to the brother of the guy who invented Stanford University. It started Stanford University. He was into seances, and he was in Australia, and a live turtle, dropped into the seance room, and he kept the turtle, and he was in his garden. And when the turtle died, it's in a part of a collection of Apports at Stanford University. So I say to people, okay, so is that an extraterrestrial turtle that fell out of the sky? No, it's coming from a higher realm. So they can create that, same as ghosts and stuff like that. And that's why you find on board the ship that people will say, I was on board the ship and my husband was on there and I was furious. You're playing with my mind. That's not my husband. My husband is dead. There's no way. He's got a birthmark on his back. You pull the shirt. I want to see the back. And they pull off the shirt and there's the birthmark. And the woman's going, couldn't believe it. Or the one guy, they brought his dog on. And he was furious too. They were trying to play with my mind. My live dog was there and the dog was playing with me. And I was playing with it. And I was so happy. And suddenly I realized, what did they bring my dog on for? And that's the thing where you start to realize there's this crossover between dead people and aliens. Or my friend Ron Johnson, the guy who flew the craft, he said they took him to the spirit world 3 times. The first time they took him to the spirit world, it was like a dark sort of place. And he was there and he could hear things happening, but he didn't see anything. The second time they took him, he could hear his mother. His mother had died. He could talk to his mother, but he couldn't see her. The third, he was actually in a field. His mother was right there, just like he said, as clear as like you and I standing here. And his mother was there, and she was talking to him, and he was in this beautiful field, and there was this a little building that was there. And he said it looked like a Mormon temple, but he's a Mormon guy, so it's a little Mormon temple. And his mother says, Ron, when you die, you're going to get a room in this building. I've got a room in this building. Your father's got a room in this building. He said he could see the building open up, and there was his father in one of these rooms. And so they go into the building, and then he says, I got into the building, Grant. He said, it's the weirdest thing. It was like 100 times the size inside as it was outside. And I go, 100 times the inside is outside? And I'm thinking to myself, are you in a UFO or are you in a Mormon temple? Because that's what people inside the UFO will say. Even the ones that are on the ground that have been captured and brought down, people will say it's like inside. You could become disoriented because it's huge on the inside, and that gives this idea of what's time and space. And so he said, and he was inside the building, and then he started talking about the crystals. His mother shows him the crystals, and the whole idea is that the beings are in the spirit world. They're taken into the spirit world, and the alien, this Elby, his name is Elby, is there. And then he starts showing the crystals, and you see the crossovers between paranormal phenomena. So he says, I go down to the end of the building, and there's this table with these crystals coming out of the table. And then his mother says, Ron, you don't have a crystal. When you have a crystal, when you die, your crystal will come out of the table, and you'll be able to look at the crystal and see your life and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, crystal? Are you sure? Crystal? And he said, well, I said, how does it work? He said, well, you look at the crystal at a certain angle and you can see it. He said, my dog had a crystal and my dog died in 1972. He said, my dog disappeared in 1972 and I didn't know where it was. So I looked at the crystal and I'm looking at my dog's crystal and I could see at the very end, the neighbor shot him and took him to a dump and threw him in a dump. And then now I know what happened to my dog. And the thing with that is, if you take a look at, there's a UFO documentary called UFOs, UFO Cover-Up Live, 1988. If you look at that documentary, that's where they introduced the idea about the live alien, and the government's dropping a bunch of stuff. It was the last days of the Reagan administration. And I think Reagan wanted this out at the end of his administration, and it dropped some stories. So anyway, in that, Richard Doty, who's playing the Falcon, this codename Falcon guy, he said, the most amazing thing I saw with the aliens was they had a crystal. And they showed this drawing of this alien holding this crystal. And the crystal was really weird. You could look in the crystal and you could see the history of the world. And they actually showed the crucifixion of Jesus to the American government on this crystal. It's the same story as Ron Johnson's telling the story about the crystal. And then Michael Newton tells the story. Michael Newton says, when you die, you go there and you have these big giant libraries. And what you're going to do is plan for your next life. And you have these big books and you open the book and there's a crystal inside the book. And you look in the crystal and you can see your past lives and you plan for your future lives. You can see your future lives, past lives. It's the same story. 3 different paranormal phenomena telling the same story about this crystal thing. And that's where you start to realize that this thing is way more spiritual. It's way more woo-woo than people think it is. And you're making the perception that it looks solid. But as I know, I had 2 experiences. The one where the thing was flashing around the sky and then it turned into the red object. The second one I had was right over top of the car. We were there and we were flashing at these orbs on the ground. This is 1976. And I got pretty close the first time. I was like 50 feet away. I was going to jump on this thing. So I knew exactly what it was. And I'm showing these kids and flashing lights at it. You flash the light at this orb and it would flash 3 times. And I'd go side to side and the thing would go like a leaf back and forth across the road. And these kids are going, oh, it's so cool. And then all of a sudden I realized, like, hey, there's nothing inside that orb. I'm getting it upset. The big one's going to come. And then I look on the American border. I'm looking, oh my God, there's this huge arc welding light on the American border. I go, oh no, we're going to get abducted. I got these little kids. They're not coming home. Why'd I do this? It's stupid. And I tell the kids, let's go back to the car. So go back to the car. So it's an arc welding light and it's going along the American border and we're facing east. It's going along the American border and it starts making the turn. I'm going, no, don't turn. And then I'm not looking. And then I'm sort of looking ahead and I'm going, what am I going to do? This is terrible. And the kids are yelling and screaming, here it comes. They're all excited in the back. They're having a great time. And then I said to the kids, I said, give me my binoculars. And it goes, and I can see it. It's right at the end of the road and it turns down the road. And I go, oh no, we're going to get abducted for sure. And it's coming down the road really seemed like really low. But it was no longer the arc welding light. Now it was a triangle of triangle. That was the first triangle that I know of. That's when it started, 76. So it's triangle, and it had two red lights, and it had a green light in the back, and it was flying with the flat end out. So it's flying flat end towards me, and it was coming. And I'm looking at this thing, and it went right above the car. And I'm looking up at this thing with the binoculars, and it was either very close or very big because it was the entire field of vision. And these lights looked like they were about 5-6 feet across, but I couldn't tell whether it was lights on a craft or whether it was the craft. But then when years later, the one kid actually became an aeronautical engineer. One of the kids in the back seat, went to Finland, came back. I was shoveling snow at my mother's house. He lived down the street, and he comes by, and his name is Brian. So he said, "Hey, Grant, you still into UFOs?" I said, "Yeah, I'm still doing UFOs." He said, "Remember that thing we saw?" I said, "Hey, you remember that?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Don't say nothing. I'm going to interview you." And I got him on tape. It's actually on my YouTube channel. So I put him on tape. I don't know what he's going to say. I said, "Okay, Brian, remember that story? Tell me the story. What happened?" He told me basically the whole story about the thing over top of the car, and then the Royal Canadian Mounted Police come, the federal police officers come, and what's going on here? You see that object there? And he goes, "Yeah, I see that object." And then we show him the ones on the end of the road, and he suddenly freaks out, gets in his car, and drives off because he realizes I'm about to get his license plate number and get him on the record for what he saw. And anyway, so he's telling the story, and then he says, "Oh, it was come across and it had these blue lights on it." I go, "Blue lights?" And he said, "Yeah, and it had that gunmetal gray." I said, "Metal? You saw metal?" I said, "Yeah, that's gunmetal gray." And I go, and I didn't say nothing. And that's the whole thing. You get people who are having the same experience. And Kit Green, who's one of the guys around the Weird Desk, will say the same thing. You'll get people who will see the same being, and everybody sees something different. And I remember the one was a portal in Mount Shasta. And there were 7 people went inside the portal. And I interviewed most of these people, and they went inside this portal. And there was this alien inside. They called it a Zendra. This alien standing there. And everybody's having a different experience. One is hearing this guy with language they can't understand. One's getting a message about what they would do with their life and stuff like that. And then the one guy had gone in, he was a translator, because this is all Latino. So the one guy was a translator for the main woman. And then I said to him, I said, "Hey, you're inside there? You saw him?" He said, "Grant, you can't believe it. There's extraterrestrials out there. I saw him. I was standing right there." I said, "Oh, so they said it was a hologram," because that's what they told me. The first year he was solid. The second year was a hologram. You can see the trees through. I said, "So it's a hologram." "What do you mean a hologram?" "What do you mean it's a hologram?" I said, "Yeah, all the other 6 said it was a hologram." He said, "Grant, I was standing close enough I could see the wrinkles in his face. He was not a hologram." And that's the whole thing. You see that, and they actually talk about Skinwalker Ranch. They tell one story at Skinwalker Ranch. There's guys with the Gen 3 glasses. All these investigators are standing there, and the thing comes over the ridge, and it flies right by them. It flies right by them, and they all got the Gen 3 glasses, and they're watching this thing as it flies by. End of the night, they all make notes. Everybody saw something different. And this whole idea, it may not be as solid as you think it is. They may be projecting this in your head. It's happening in your head, and they know how things are projected in your head. And everything's in one spot. So you're there, everything's there, and they know how to manipulate things. And it's not what people think it is. You think it's this object. And that's why I say, "So what's it doing?" Like when people see a UFO, I say, "Hey, so what was it doing?" They always say the same thing. "It wasn't doing anything. It was just there." And I said, "Do you think it saw you?" "Yeah, I think so." "Do you think it wanted you to see it?" "Yeah, I think so." And this whole idea is, why are they showing up? Why are they doing the flyby stuff? It's all this game. It's all this thing to drag us down the road to realize that the world is non-local. And one of the biggest dimensions that I've seen in the last 50 years, the biggest thing that's just happened, and I don't know if you followed this, it's called the Telepathy Tapes. It's now the #1 podcast in the world.
I did listen. Yeah.
And I did the interview with her, the first interview with Kai Dickens. I think that is one of the biggest discoveries in the history, because it's going to be able to prove that telepathy is real. These kids are 100% accurate. And if you could prove that telepathy is real in a scientific setting, then the idea of non-local world, the material world all falls apart.
I hope so. I do just want to hop in with a slightly deflationary take on this, because I read what I thought was like a pretty good skeptical investigation, or just sort of counter take. I wouldn't maybe call it a full-on debunk, but it was
from McGill University.
It was. Yep. It was.
I confronted the guy. I'll tell you the story. I confronted the guy.
Okay.
I said, "Hey, you want to play the game, man?" I said, "I'll invite you into the thing, and you can sit with the kids." He said, "Well, no, there's this guy in the United States. He'll watch and tell you what's going on." I said, "No, I don't want someone to watch. I want you to go in there in the same setting that these kids are, and I want you to get the targets." And he immediately backed out. And I said, are you not going to do it?" He wouldn't answer my letters anymore. And that's the whole thing. Can you do it? It's one thing to sit on the sidelines and say, like your skeptical worldview, "Oh, this is what's going on, this is what's going on," and make up all this stuff. Anybody can do that.
Well, what do you make of this take that it's a serious problem that the people who are holding the pads, who have the information that the kids are trying to extract? So when I listened first through, I thought it was very impressive, but
Yeah.
considering this idea does make it a little bit harder. Like you're talking, the mothers are aware of the number that their children are trying to guess, and the mothers are the ones holding the pads that the kids are touching, or sometimes they're right next to them, maybe kind of pointing at the screen. It does sound a little bit like this is not a great scientific experiment. Like if you really wanted to do that, you would have an intermediary person who didn't know the number. Like you and I are looking at a 4-digit number. We want the kid to guess the number. Maybe you and I know the number, but the kid is working with the mother who doesn't know. That, like, doesn't that make sense as a more rigorous scientific approach?
But if you go to her site, the Telepathy tapes, and you look at the videos, you see the one kid with the blanket over his head, and he's nowhere near her. He's not even close to her, and he's picking these numbers off. Or you use the example of they're moving the kid's hand. There's only maybe one out of all those kids where they're moving the kid's hand. Or when they come up with the thing about the hill, these kids do not leave the house. These are non-verbal autistics where they do not leave the house. I mean, how do they all come up with the idea of the hill where they're all on this hill thing? And they're going to do it in controlled conditions, in Faraday cages and all this kind of stuff. And I said to Dan Powell.
Diane Powell.
Dan Powell is the one that discovered this. Haley was the first one that Haley hit the 162 numbers right, where they put the pad across and she touches, and the pad across and she touches, stuff like that. And she's the one that's going to do the experiments. And I lost my train of thought as to where she's going to do these experiments in the controlled condition. So if I get a skeptic, I don't want the skeptic just to say, oh, possibly this is being relayed this way, or they're touching or whatever. You go in there and you do the same thing the kid's doing, and we'll have the mother there, and you can do the mind reading. Because they're going to do it in controlled conditions where there's no connection. The one I wanted to give the example of is you do it the other way around, where you give the kid the number and get the mother to determine what the number is, telepathic, because his mothers can pick it up telepathically. So this is the condition that they're going to do the experiments, and I absolutely maintain that this is going to do, because there's this idea of the field. It's the same thing as because I've worked on, in my books I wrote about savants. I say savants is the biggest thing that you can do, and you get this guy. His name is George Finn, out of New York City. There was a documentary done with 60 Minutes with him back many years ago. And we've known about these savants that have these unbelievable abilities, where they say to George Finn, like the guy from 60 Minutes sitting there with his little thing. He says, okay, what's this date? What day of the week is it? And the guy goes, this Tuesday. It's, whatever. And he gets like 5 or 6 of them right. And then he says, that's incredible, George. How do you do that? That's pretty good. Hey, it's pretty good. I can do that. And the guy's like, he can't button his shirt. He can't do anything. And so then he says, okay, George, can you tell me what's 2 times 3? And George goes, would that be 5? And he says, okay, what's 5 times 7? And he goes, that'd be 50. You can't. That they're proving this point that they can, because their left brain is shut down. If you're nonverbal autistic, your left brain is shut down. So you can't do simple mathematics, which is done by the left brain, but you can do the right brain. They're pulling stuff. Like, where did George Finn get that? And George Finn was famous for the fact that you could get him and you could say, George, what are the next 12 years that Easter is going to fall on April the 1st? And he'll name them, and he'll name them all off. And you go like, where is he getting that from? He's not calculating. He's pulling that out of a field. So when I interviewed Diane Powell, I said, is there a field? And this is the whole idea. I wrote a whole book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity. I talk about Tesla's invention of the alternating engine. I talk about the invention of the hologram and the invention of the laser. And it was all this stuff where they're sitting there and all of a sudden popped into their head and they go running into the lab and write this stuff down. And that's the whole idea, that there's this field, that the people are pulling this stuff out of a field. And if you can, and the idea is to shut the left brain down. So you take a book called Contact Modalities, like people who are channeling or people who will be able to get this, claim to get this stuff. They're all doing the same technique. They're all shutting down the left brain. That's what hypnosis is. It's saying to the ego, it's saying, hey, follow your breath. And the ego says, I could follow my breath. I'm the best breath follower in the world. And then it sort of falls away. And then you say, okay, go back to the breath, because the ego wants to wander and it wants to think about other stuff. And that's what you're doing. You're shutting the left brain down with hypnosis, with all that kind of stuff. Or you have an accident where people will suddenly, have this damage to the brain. There's always trauma involved. And that sort of splits the veil, and suddenly these people can pull stuff out of a field. So that's my basic premise, is that the stuff is in the field, and that's how these savants are pulling this stuff out which there's no possible way they could know. And you have to do it under controlled conditions. But for skeptics, it's not good enough to sit on the sidelines. And that's the thing I remember. I told Dan Powell, the thing I don't want you to do is the same thing ufology did, is to listen to the skeptics. Because if you listen to the skeptics, what happened with the Haley, I don't know if you saw the Haley experiment we did, where Haley, the gatekeeper, said to her, Haley, are you reading my mind? And Haley goes, yeah, she is. And she says, how do you say I love you in German? And she said, ich liebe dich. And she goes, oh my God, she's reading my mind. And that's one of the things that's on the telepathy tapes. Almost every single kid can speak multiple languages. So you get, and Diane Powell had one kid at 2 years old could speak 8 languages. And it wasn't English and French. It was Japanese. It was Arabic. It was, all these bizarre languages this kid could speak. And you got to start to explain, like, how does some kid who's never left the house, who couldn't until 5 months before, could not even spell into a keypad, how do they know other languages? And it's just so bizarre where they have this sort of stuff. Now you got to prove it. But the problem that I don't want them to do is spend the next 80 years, the same as ufology. Ufology has sat there and listened to the skeptics who say, no, it's all balloons. That's what they're doing with Arrow. They're just making stuff up, and they say, no, it's not that. It could be this. And if there's only 5% unknowns, and if we had more information, we could explain the 5% unknowns. And you end up in this thing where it's for 80 years, we go over and over and try to prove it to the skeptics. Forget about the skeptics. UFOs exist. Let's go on and let's try to figure out why they're here. What are they doing? Talk to the experiencers. And we spend our whole time trying to convince the skeptic. And that's what I'm afraid they're going to do in the telepathy tapes, is they're going to be sitting there trying to do the skeptics, and the skeptics come up with a new thing. No, we think this is what happened. And some bizarre, almost like Ron Pandolfi says, oh, you made it up. You got it from Dan Smith and you made it up, and then you made up the quote. And it's like, go get lost, man. There's no way that's but how do you fight that? When a skeptic puts that out, and that's what they do in the UFO field. What they did, one of the things I looked at was the Holloman Air Force Base film. So what they did, and the guy who had the film told me it was 1971. So what do? They go and tell Richard Doty it's 1964. So Richard Doty goes and tells everybody, no, it's 1964. Grant's got it wrong. It's 1964. And then everybody goes, oh, it's a 64 or 71. And everybody goes, I don't know. Forget the story. We can't figure out what it is. And that's what they do. They throw mud in the water. They even said, Chris Bledsoe was told by the CIA, if we wanted you dead, you would have been dead 10 years ago. We don't do that anymore. What they do is they just throw mud in the water. They do the skeptic thing. They just throw it and they make you think, oh, well, maybe that could be true. And then suddenly you're off base and you're spending all your time trying to prove it to this one guy because he's got this objection, instead of getting past the fact that telepathy is right, or let's establish telepathy and let's do it, the experiment in the Faraday cage or whatever they're going to do, and let's move on and say, what does this mean? Or these kids speaking multiple languages, or we're going to spend this whole time trying to prove telepathy to some skeptic who's always going to come up with something new and some new idea of how it was done and stuff like that. And to me, that just, because I've done that for 50 years. I used to do that I remember I did it with James Oberg on UFOs back in the 1990s when the first chat boards came out. And I would make this argument to James Oberg from NASA. He's a big skeptic from NASA. And then he would come up with an explanation. And I'd spend 2 hours and I'd counter that and I'd go back, and 15 seconds later he'd reply. And I go, James, like, what are you doing? Do you actually work? Because middle of the night, the guy would answer. And it's like, do you work? Or are you doing this on work? Like, how can you answer this so fast? And it would just be the objection. And I would spend all my time trying to get the next objection. And he would instantly come up with another objection. And then I realized, like, this is a total waste of time. I mean, this is not getting us anywhere. And that's what the UFO people are doing. They're still trying to prove. That's what Congress is trying to do. They're trying to prove UFOs exist. I mean, let's get past this and find out, because they're ignoring the whole thing about why are they here? Why are they over nuclear missile silos? I say, thank God, praise Jesus, they're over missile silos. I mean, we've been within 2 minutes of destroying the world twice. That we've come within 2 minutes of destroying the world, and I'm happy that they can shut down missile silos. I mean, all this kind of stuff. And that's the thing, is what's the message? And that's what they're trying to drag us to, this thing of getting to the message, rather than this reproduction of 1947. Let's get some more. If we got a million photos, because James Lukatsky said, number one, he said, we have 200,000 sightings in the database for OSAP. And he said, It's like driving down a road and every car is different. Every UFO sighting is different. So what are you going to do by cataloging and stuff? You're not going to do anything. And yet we say, if we got 3 million photographs, then we'll figure it out. If we got 4 million photographs, no, it's just going to be the same thing. No, it's just a balloon. Now it's drones have been added to the thing. And now it's this secret, right? The Chinese have secret technology. How do you fight that off? The Chinese have secret anti-drone technology, and they can go over the White House right now. They got technology, can drop a bomb on the White House, and it's like they just come up with something new. And it's like all this stuff. And how do you fight that? How do you prove that's not the case? Because anybody can come up with an alternate explanation. It's almost like QAnon. It's like you're fighting QAnon. You're not going to get anywhere. People who believe that go down that road, and that's what a skeptic is. A skeptic is someone whose worldview is very set, and it may be a religious worldview or a scientific worldview. And once you pull them out of that worldview and challenge it, then they start attacking it, but they're defending their worldview.
Yeah, people have a really hard time moving that needle. That's why, actually, this is my motto. What must we believe? It's about. It's one you have no choice but to accept, because it is obvious fact. But I tend to agree with you that it is a frustrating sort of infinite process of, well, what about this? What about this? But on the other hand, we do need more information. I think we just kind of have to develop more data collection mechanisms and scientific validation.
But that's what the phenomena is doing. The phenomena is forcing us to do the on curiosity. The difference is the second download I had, and it's part of that belief thing. It's the difference between believing and knowing. Someone who believes, you can spend the rest of your life, you're never going to convince them of anything other than what they believe. Your worldview is set by your beliefs. As Einstein said, you spend from 0 to 25 years inventing and creating. And after 25 years, you spend the rest of your life defending what you did. Believers are not the people you got to listen to. It doesn't matter what you believe or who cares what you believe. I mean, everybody has a different belief system. I don't care. I'm interested in the people who know, somebody who's actually been inside the craft. Those are the people I got to talk to. The people that claim that they know, the people that believe. Everybody's got a different opinion of what the inside of the craft looks like. So then when you get Lakatsky, so Lakatsky is the main guy, and nobody listens to him. And when he's on an interview, people say, oh, they're not briefing the government. And I go, you didn't listen to Lakatsky. Lakatsky said he had a meeting in 2011 in a congressional facility. And that means in Congress. He had a congressional facility, and there was a senator in the room, and that they had got a craft, and they'd been inside the craft. And that's the kind of stuff you got to listen to when you get this high level guy. Now, maybe he's faking it, but I don't think he's faking it. And then people start asking, what's inside the craft? And that's when he said, if you knew the answer to that, you'd know the whole rest of the book was just primitive. And that's the whole idea. He said, there's no engine, there's no fuel tank, there's no wings. So what are we dealing with? And that's this question about, is this as nuts and bolts as you think it is? What's actually propelling this thing? Or people will talk about the craft being alive. Every single witness that I talked to, 36 witnesses, all said the craft was alive. That you touched it and you became one with the craft, and you could see in 360 degrees. So when they'd say, oh, I could see in 360 degrees, they say, hey, that's what people out of body said the same thing. They can see in 360 degrees, which makes no sense. The same as, it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to make up a story, why would you say that you can see in 360 degrees? Why would you say, oh, I flew the craft? I mean, if you're going to make up a story about being on the UFO, the last thing you want to put on the story is, oh, I was flying the craft. Because it was the same reaction I got. It's like, give your head a shake. What are you? You're insane? You flew the craft? It doesn't make any sense. You get all these weird things that people will tell you, or it's within you. You instantly go to where you're going. There's no time limit. There's nothing. It's just you're instantaneously there. And the idea about aliens not getting older, and they don't eat and they don't sleep and they don't drink and all this kind of stuff, and there's no bathroom on board the ship, and all this kind of stuff, and the time and space disappears, and that's the kind of stuff. But you got to listen to the believers can believe whatever they want to believe. That it's the experiencers, and we're not doing the experiencer thing. We're still doing the lights in the sky stuff, which is just telling you that something's going on. And I think you get 42. Even they did 4,200 experiencers, and they asked them 650 questions, and everybody's just totally ignored that evidence. And that's the evidence where 50% say they've been healed, 50% say they can heal other people, 40% say they knew the answer to everything in yours, 80% of out-of-body experiences. And you start looking at that data, and you say there's some very distinct patterns here about these 4,200 people who claim that they've interacted with non-human intelligence.
Who collected that data?
That was Ray Hernandez and Edgar Mitchell, a sixth man to walk on the moon. It's called the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. They've changed the name to some other thing because they're, again, concerned. They want just PhDs and stuff like that. But it's
Okay.
called the Free Foundation, and the book was called Beyond UFOs. It's the most important book I think there is, because it has all this data that they collected over a number of years with all these distinct patterns. Like 37% of all experiencers say they've had a near-death experience. Well, what's the chance of that? Because everybody thinks the near-death experience is random, and you think that an abduction is random. Well, what's the chances that 37% of them are going to say that they had both random experiences? It's like something's going on here. It's like, what's really going on here? Or the 360 degrees, or the fact that there's no time and space. Or they ask them, how many people think that's evil? 9%. That's all. 83% were asked the question, if you could stop your abduction experiences, would you stop them? 83% say nope, keep it going. Those are the kind of stats where you see these stats and you realize, like, this is important evidence. And it's 4,200 people. This is a huge database that they're getting. Or 14% say they've flown the craft. And I went to Ray Hernandez and said, Ray, I got all these people flown the craft. Can we get these people that filled out the data that they've flown the craft? And he said, well, people say all sorts of things that they see on board the craft. I said, yeah, Ray, but when they start flying the craft, don't you think we should talk to these people? To me, it was the ultimate thing. It's like, wow, we're going to talk to these people. And then you get these patterns where people talk about the craft is alive. You become one with the craft. Everybody's seeing something different. Like, what's the chances of that? I couldn't believe that everybody touches something different. They have no two stories are the same. And yet it's the same sort of common story that you can go wherever you want. You can think whatever you want. Or the beings be behind you and stuff like that. You start seeing these patterns that sort of tell you, but they're coming from people who know rather than people on the outside. The people on the outside can just sort of guess at what they think is going on, and that's fine, but it's not real data. It's about somebody's opinion. It's like you can have opinions on astronomy about how the world was started or whatever, but you got to go talk to the astronomers who are actually collecting the data.
On the topic of these patterns, what do you make of hybridization claims? People who have had experiences where they were presented with a youth of some kind, and the beings they were encountering said, this is, your child, or this is a hybrid, and can you nurture them or play with them or something? And have you encountered that stuff? It pops up a bunch in John Mack's work. And what do you make of it, and how do you reconcile it with the idea of the spiritual hypothesis?
Well, but again, it comes back to the nature of reality. How many people have you ever seen who saw somebody get abducted? The answer is zero. Nobody's ever seen anybody be, except for the one Bud Hopkins case where they saw this woman coming out of the 25th window or whatever it was. Other than that, nobody sees anybody being abducted. That's where the big question comes down. Is this a because people are going through windows, they're going through doors, stuff like that. And so the question is this actually an abduction experience, or is this an out-of-body experience? And one of the main people that I quote is Betty Andreasen. So Betty Andreasen had 6 books written about her abduction experience. She's a famous abductee. And in the one, she said, oh, they took me here and I went to see the one, called the one, God, behind the glass doors at the one. And they took her in this orb and there's no engine. She's trying to find the engine, like, where's the engine in this thing? And it's moving, and they're taking her, and the beings can't go to the door. So she goes by herself and stuff like that. And she's coming back, and they said, they dropped me off in the back where my trailer was, in the backyard. And I was so happy to be home. And I went running into the thing, and her husband was sleeping in the bed. And I saw myself sitting on the side of the bed. And I got back in myself and I went back to sleep. And so this is the whole question. So to me, it's always theory of wow. It's always the Jesus circus. They're always doing something that's weird. It's just weird, and you're trying to figure out, like, what's going on here, and you never have any answers to it. And some people have one answer. So they're doing the weird thing. Now, there may be some sort of thing in that world that they create these beings. Because Sherry Wild told me she had 14 kids. She told me what they look like and stuff. They'd taken her to show these 14 kids. So there may be this situation where they're putting these kids on another planet, or they're on the ship. So, but again, it's part of us. It may be what they're actually doing, but it's also part of the circus. The people, a lot of experiencers will say, I am not from here. That's my family. The very heavy number of people will say, that's my family. I have this connection to them and stuff like that. So there is something going on with the hybridization thing. And maybe they're doing another planet, putting beings on another planet. And people say, that's horrible. It's horrible. What can they? I don't have free will and stuff like that. It's okay that they may have created us and put us on our planet. Like, wow, that's great. We're on this planet. They put us here. But if we're going to help put somebody else on another planet, then you're against that. But I still think a lot of it, you're still in lessons as to what's going on and what they want. So that may be part of it. And then people say that the hybridization thing is not going on, which is another thing that people don't realize, that the UFO phenomena is not the same phenomena. So the abduction, I had Nancy Train was the first person that was abducted. We published both of her books. And Nancy Tremaine was dealing with reptilians. And the kid that she had came to her and scratched her breast, these scratch marks. And it was this reptilian baby that she had. And so you have that experience. You have it started in 61, but before 61, I don't care what anyone says. There was no abductions. People say, yeah, no, I said no. There was no grays. There was no abductions. In fact, there was no reptilians before 1980. That you start to see these patterns. When you've been in as long as I have, you know the patterns are different. 1895, people say it's extraterrestrials. I know it's extraterrestrial. I said, really? 1895, 1896, 1897, they were flying 10,000 sightings over the United States and Europe. They were in wooden ships with propellers and balloons and guys hanging down off of ropes that were talking in rhymes and riddles, weird things, and they're dressed like human beings. And I said, do you really honestly think? And they said they were from Mars. Do you really honestly think that in 1896, wooden ships flew through the vacuum of time and space from Mars and landed? And then I said, moreover, where did they go? Where did the airships go? They came here for a couple of years and what? They flew back to Mars? This doesn't make any sense. And then you get the Foo Fighters. People are complaining, oh, they're coming close to our jet fighters. I said, go back. My father was a Royal Canadian Air Force pilot. His boss had the Foo Fighters on the edge of his plane. They were not 5 feet away. They were on the edge of the plane. The Foo Fighters were only around for 1 year. So where did the Foo Fighters go? Why did the Foo Fighters do that? It's this message. It's the military message. Stop the military. Stop the killing. So they're doing this sort of message thing. And then after World War II comes the green fireballs. That only lasted for a couple of years. The green fireballs are over all of the plutonium plants and over the missile silos and all this kind of stuff in the end of there. And then they go away. Then the Adamski crafts come with balls under them. And then the Adamski crafts turn into ones without the balls on them. And then you have the windows. And then the windows go away. There are no UFO sightings anymore with windows. And then Stanton Friedman used to say, we got evidence. We want hard evidence. We want to measure. And the evidence was the ground traces. There are no two ground traces. There's 4,000 ground traces, but there was no two the same. And the thing was, I went to Ted Phillips, who ran the ground traces, the guy that was in charge of it, in 2001. So that's almost 20 some years ago. I said, Ted, am I crazy or have the ground traces stopped? He said, no, I think they've stopped. We haven't had one this year yet. He said there was maybe 1 or 2 a year, but yeah, they've stopped. And that's what you see is this pattern. They do this, and then they went from ground traces to crop circles. The crop circles started, and then the crop circles start, and you see these patterns. They do this, and then they do this, then they do this, and they change this. Now it's orbs. Everything's orbs. And you don't have the abduction experiences so much anymore. You have the patterns have changed. People are getting messages in their head and stuff like that. And you realize that they're doing these different patterns. And it's almost like school kids. So the grade 1 class in its outer space or wherever, they say, oh, we're communicate. We're going to do orbs or do UFOs. And the next one says, we'll do calculations. And the grade 3 says, oh, we're going to do crop circles. And it's all these different things that they put out just to move us down the road. But the same things don't happen. 1975, there was almost no discussion of abductions. There was ground traces. We had no abductions in my area. And there was the orbs. We didn't even call them orbs. We called them ground lights. Now it's like everything's orbs. And then when the digital photographs came in, then all these other orbs started to come out and the digital photographs, and everybody disputed that sort of stuff. And you see this pattern that it just gets more complex and weirder, and they're not doing the same thing as they were doing before. Especially the stuff like, no windows. They had, you can talk to people now. They had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, angel hair. They were dropping this crap all the time. When's the last time there was an angel hair? That hasn't happened for decades. Or they say, oh, they're over the nuclear missile silos. This is terrible. They're over our nuclear missile silos. I said, when? Oh, Mulster, 1967. Do you realize that's 60 years ago? Do you think you could find a case that's a little more? 2010. There has not been one since 2010. And that was just a questionable one in South Dakota. So the thing is, people are quoting things from 50 years ago, assuming that it's happening now. And when I'm in the field long enough, I know that the same thing doesn't happen. It keeps changing. They change the pattern to this and they change the pattern to that. Or the other thing is automatic writing, where people are writing alien language. That there's no way that was happening in 1970. Not a chance. Now I've got piles of people that they'll show you alien writing. They're sitting there talking to you, and their hand is going, it's writing this writing, or what's called light language. the first time I heard this light language, somebody played me a tape. I said, that is the weirdest thing I ever heard in my life. And then suddenly I did one podcast where I had 20 people doing light language. There's no way there was light language in 1975. Now there's all these women who are doing this light language, and there's orbs, there's photographs. They're doing light, they're talking this language that doesn't make any sense. And then these orbs are flying around, and it's like, there's no way this is happening in 75. It's just a different world completely than it was. And people don't realize that. They think that what happened now happened then. No, not. Everything's changing. And that's what happens with the UFO sightings, where you start to see where everybody's seeing something different, where you can have 6 people all watching the same event. And when they record it, one sees a triangle, one sees a saucer, and all this kind of stuff. And you realize this is way more complex than what it is. You think that that's a real event going out there. And we know they can project whatever they want. They can project 3D holograms of screens where you're looking in front of screens. You're looking at screens and the screen disappears. Or the one guy, he was one of the first guys that John Mack used. What was his name? He's the guy that was, they taught the alien writing to, and he was fighting them all the time. And John Mack had him, and he talked about this thing where he's the guy that came up with the idea of screen imaging. He's the guy that first used the word screen imaging. And he said the Greys are always screen imaging. And he said, you're not fooling me. And he told the one time when the Grey showed up as a human with a military uniform on, he said, you're a Grey, you're not fooling me. In fact, you haven't even got the right uniform on. And he said, instantaneously, the uniform changed to the right uniform. And that's what the power of these beings seem to have, is they can project whatever they want. They can make you think whatever they want. And that's what Jim Semivan says. You know, he said, like, people will come to him and say, oh, my daughter wants to talk to you about UFOs. He said, no, I'm not talking to them. There's no way I'm gonna say this. This is a room of mirrors with this quicksand floor. There's no way I'm going to talk to your kid that these things can come in and they can take you out of your room. And because he's a military guy, so it's all threat and enemy and stuff like that. And they can put ideas in your head and stuff like that. I'm not going to tell some little kid that. And there's nothing you can do about it and stuff like that. So that's a point I always try to make to people, that 1895, 1896, this thing just keeps changing, and it changes according to your belief system. So in 1895, we believed in Mars because we saw the canals in 1890, and everybody's excited about the canals. So of course they were from canal, and the Canadians were told they were from Uranus. I remember the Canadians had this, the being they were dealing with, his name was Alpha. The CIA dealt with him as well, but they had the being. And I remember I was talking to the metallurgist for the Canadian government, and the alien was claiming it's from Uranus, and that there was 500 million people on Uranus. And Uranus is like 325 degrees below zero. And so I said to him, Uranus? And he said, Grant, let me make a point to you. At no time did Wilbur Smith or I ever for 1 second believe he was from Uranus. and they're using because that was the thing. And once everybody realized that it couldn't be from Mars and Venus, then suddenly what did the aliens say? 1960. Oh, Zeta, they didn't even say Zeta Reticuli. We sort of figured this out. Oh, we're from this other star system. And then they're all from Pleiades and from Uranus and Lyra and all these different things. And then when we suddenly realized that you still can't get there from here, and these beings can go through walls and stuff, then suddenly in the 60s, later in the 60s, we started talking about multidimensional universes. And then suddenly over from other universes. And then the latest one is that they're this whole idea that we're from the 5th dimension, we're the 6th dimension, we're the 12th dimension, 9th dimension, stuff like that, talking about dimensions. And they just use whatever is in your head. Even Barbara Streisand's stepson is an experiencer. And he told me that when he was talking to them, they said to him, when we come into your world, we go into your head, and we see what's in your head, and it is whatever's in your head. That's what we use to teach you a lesson. We have no other choice. So if you're in fear, they're going to use fear to teach you a lesson. If you're in joy, they're going to use joy to teach you a lesson. That's what they do. And that's Barbara Streisand's stepson that told me that story.
So you think there's a trickster element. What do you think about the diversity of intelligences that we're dealing with here? Like, if you think we're confronting some kind of spiritual intelligences, are you imagining or guessing that they are unified in their approach, or do you think they might be coming from different groups or have different agendas?
My impression would be they are all etheric beings. John Mack pointed out the fact that if you're in fear, you may see a gray. If you're very highly energized, like this woman that wrote the book, if it's all sex, having sex with aliens, it's always reptilian. Or if you're very spiritual like Chris Bledsoe, you're going to see the etheric beings, like the beings of light and stuff like that you will project. So they can come in. That's what Yossi Ronan's people said. We can come in, we can take on whatever form we want to take on. So it depends upon about your structure, what they're going to come in as. and because we're all etheric beings, and they know that the physical body, they can take on, like if they can recreate a dead person on board a ship, they can create a physical manifestation that looks physical and may not be physical on the inside, but it can look really physical and act like this sort of stuff. So they can project whatever they want. They know how the world works and how reality works. They can project something into your head that you're seeing your dead mother or whatever like that. But it's all this idea that it's a higher reality. We believe that the physical world is an actual physical world, when in fact it's not a physical world. Everything is 99.99999% space, and nothing, it's like energy is the atom and the molecules and stuff are all just energy patterns. And then when they come in, we can measure them and stuff like that. And we're starting to realize we get in this idea about, is it a computer world? Is it a computer
simulation?
And that's where we're getting into, is that these beings are, I think they're all in the higher realm, where they can come in and project whatever they want to project, and based upon your experience. So in 1890, they'll come as one thing. Now they'll change as we go into the future, and project other things that they're just a higher vibrating frequency. They're almost in the same world as ghosts or stuff like that, where they're interacting. But the trickster element is not, I don't see it as a trickster element. It's this idea where it's just to get you to think, rather than to try to trick you. It's to try to get you to go, what is really going on here? And once you get to that state, then people start doing experiments, and we move down the road. And as long as there's no on curiosity, there's no experiments done. People do not spend money on things that they already know. And that's what they're doing. And so it's a higher form. They understand more than we do how the world works. And a lot of times people will ask them things and they'll say, you wouldn't understand. And I believe that's true, that they just have things that you couldn't understand. Same as you try to explain to people now what we know now about UFOs to people in 1975, they'd look like you're crazy. I mean, all this kind of stuff about being on the ship and what's on the ship, and this sort of stuff, that it just keeps changing. It's a very fluid world where everything is an idea, or the one idea is this idea about analytical idealism, where everything is a thought form. And you're interacting with thought forms, and you got to get to that idea that things are thought forms and they can change and stuff like that. And you're controlling your own destiny and stuff like that. That's where we're going. And that's where I think part of the cover up is, because, for example, Tom DeLonge told this story. And I always say the consciousness is the thing you got that everybody's missing. So Tom DeLonge is talking to the three Lockheed, if you know the story, he gets brought into a Lockheed skiff when the whole thing starts in 2015. He says, I need some help or whatever. And he's talking to the Robert Weiss, who's the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. He's talking to the head scientist, and he's talking to a guy by the name of Landry. Was it Landry? We just discovered who it was. But anyway, the one guy says to him, he says, so all I want to know, Tom, is how did they get here? How does the propulsion work? How did they get here? And of course, Tom DeLonge at that point was hanging around with Stephen Greer. So he said, oh, I think consciousness is involved. And the guy said, now you're talking. And that's all the guy wanted to talk about for 45 minutes was consciousness. So some people at the top know, same as Bob Bigelow said. And Bob Bigelow talks about this guy from Lockheed was going to give him a saucer. This is this idea that Lou Elizondo brings up in his latest book, that Lockheed was going to give OSAP a saucer, but it was blocked by the Air Force. And this guy that was in the skiff with Tom DeLonge was the guy who was going to give him the saucer. And anyway, so Bigelow said they were negotiating. He said all the contractors who had the saucers didn't get anywhere. And this is this idea about the core story, that they've got UFO hardware, but they're not getting anywhere. They can't do it. And Bob Bigelow says it involves consciousness. That's why they're not getting anywhere. So you can have the craft. They've had the craft since 1948, and they got the craft. And they can't do anything with it. So people say they're back engineering. They're not back engineering anything. They have no clue. Eric Davis said they put it on the shelf in 1989, and they haven't done a thing with it because they can't figure it out, because it has this consciousness element to it that they can't. It's almost like you need the consciousness to turn the craft on. And, so high level people like Lockheed, they know consciousness is the thing, but they can't figure out the key to the thing. They know consciousness is involved. But again, the Canadians already knew in 1950. The Americans said consciousness was involved, and I'm guessing it was because they had a live alien.
But if they have craft and if they have a live alien, then there are nuts and bolts and physical elements to this picture as well. Just want to one more time ask, do you think there are different kinds of beings, or do you think we're just dealing with one intelligence?
Well, again, you're assuming that, they can project themselves whatever they want. So they can be all sorts of beings.
But do you think like there are different groups operating with different intentions, or do you think we're dealing with one kind of unified group of intelligences operating in a similar fashion with a similar agenda, or maybe even
I think they're all
one higher
altruistic.
intelligence?
I think they're all higher intelligence, which mean they're altruistic, that they all know how the world works and they know the nature of reality. And the number one thing in the nature of reality is to understand that everything is one. Everything is connected. There is no separation. Everything is one thing. There is no world. As Jim Semivan says, there does not appear to be any there. There is no world out there. And that's the whole thing. It's this concept of mind, of fields, of mind, mental fields. We're believing this is this physical world. It's physical. It's like, yeah, this thing is solid. Don't tell me this thing ain't solid. It's solid, and it's not. We're starting to learn that through quantum physics, that things can come in and go back, and that there's time and space are doomed. And if time and space are doomed, that's the Nobel Prize from 1920 to 2022 was this thing about the experiment where they send the two particles in opposite ends and they turn the particle spin on the one and the one end, and he does it. That proves there's no time and space. So if time and space don't exist, like what's really going on here? And that's this whole idea. That's the message you're trying to get across. So these people would know you can't get here unless you know about the idea of oneness. That's where I get into. I say all the technologies I looked at, and I followed all the high level people. Every time I followed the anti-gravity thing, it didn't go anywhere. Every time I followed portals, the idea that there's time travel, every single time it was like, this may be real. Tim Taylor, if you've heard this, do you know Tim Taylor's story? Tim Taylor's this black ops guy from NASA who was dealing with Chris Bledsoe quite a bit.
Okay.
And took Chris to the Cape and took him up onto the launch facility and all this kind of stuff. So he's the guy who had an experience. He had a download experience with a patent. And he was given 40 patents, 40 and
I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is guy. He worked with Diana Pasulka, and she writes him up.
Okay, so I actually met the guy. I actually had a meeting. I actually had a meeting with the guy.
Okay,
so I had a meeting with the guy. I didn't know who he was. This is 2013. I didn't know. I knew him as Tim Taylor. I knew he was with NASA, whatever. And so he's saying to me, he's one that taught me this importance of talking to the experiencers, because he knew that I was interested in downloads. He said, well, are you talking to the experiencers? And he's following experiencers. And one of them happened to live near me in Canada. He said, I think one of the ones I'm talking to lives near you in Canada. And that's why he's watching Chris Bledsoe. He said to Chris Bledsoe, they don't talk to us, Chris. They seem to be talking to you. So we're here to find out what they're telling you. And that's the whole thing. You go to the people who are having the experiences. So he said, well, this girl lives near, and I said, where? She's in Steinbach, Manitoba. I said, that's like 30 miles from my house. So he said, do you like to talk to her? I said, yeah. So I'm on Tim Taylor's cell phone. He phones her up, and I said, hi, Connie. And I'm talking to her, and I make an agreement. I said, well, I should talk to you and stuff like that. And what she told me he was doing is he was giving her catalog, everything, all her premonitions. She was having all these premonitions, and he was tracking which ones are right, which ones were wrong. And she had a bunch of them that I tracked that were actually right. It was like, I couldn't believe it. And I interviewed her one time. We never released the interview because when we got into this part about what she was seeing, she broke down crying. It was so traumatic. So I never released the interview, but she would see this stuff. And she actually told the beings at one point to stop. So Tim Taylor is with me in this cottage in Pennsylvania with these rich guys. One guy, he's owned a big company, had this log cabin in Pennsylvania, and we're all meeting there. And Chris Bledsoe's there, and this guy's there. And so Tim Taylor pulls out his cell phone. He lets me talk to Connie. I'm talking to Connie, and then he says, "Hey, Grant, I want to ask you a question. What do you think of this?" And he never does. He never tells you anything. He just says, "What do you think of this?" So he shows me this thing, and there's this picture of these two guys in a painting. And they're flying through space in a painting. And they look like they got pajamas on. The one guy looks like he's older than the other guy. And he says, what do you think of that? And I go, I don't know. No idea, Tim. No idea. And he goes, so what do you think of this? And he gets the next one. And it's a painting of these balls. All look like they're going down a tunnel. And they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. What do you think of this? And I said, nah, I don't know. No idea. And then he shows the next one. And it's 3 pictures of an eclipse. And these 3 pictures. And I go, I had no idea what that is. And then he goes and he shows this picture of a screen with all the outer space stuff on the screen. He says, what do you think of this? I said, no idea. And then he shows me this car. It's a 56, 57 Chev on top of this parkade. He says, take a look at the car. I said, see that thing in the back seat there? It's a postcard. And I said, yeah, I see it. And he said, you know what it says on the postcard? And I said, no, I don't know what it says. And he says, it's some guy talking to his girlfriend. I think it was, I don't remember because if I ever knew who he was, I would remember these stories a bit better. But he says, oh, it's a guy in France or something, and he's talking to his girlfriend. He said, I wish I could fly through time and space to be with you. And I said, that's what it says. He said, yeah, that's what it says. And so then I go, and he says, so what do you think? I says, Tim, I have no idea. I know what you're talking about. And he says, well, you know where this is? And I says, no, I don't know where it is, Tim. He says, it's the Hughes aircraft building outside of LAX. And I said, I still don't know what you're talking about, Tim. And then he says, yeah, and people always ask me, it's been asked numerous times. I don't remember the exact phraseology, whether he said, this is where the jump room was, or this is the rumored jump room building. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I said, really? Can't see those photographs? And he shows me his photo, and especially the first one, these two guys flying through outer space, and the guy, the postcard, he's traveling through time and space, and I go, that is really weird. I'm gonna go to LAX. I'm gonna check this out. And he says, well, when you go there, he says, watch out, there's a guard or whatever. And then the last thing he says to me, he says, you know the one with the two guys flying through space? And he says to me, you know where that is? I says, no. He says, it's right outside the elevator. I said, it is? And the whole idea of the jump room, where Obama was supposed to go through the jump room, was it was in this building. It's 999 Sepulveda Avenue. It's still there. It's been turned into an office building. And outside so the elevator would go up to the 5th floor, and then that's where they would go to Mars on in this jump room with time travel. And so,
sorry, this is a new phrase for me. Jump room is like a teleportation location. Is the idea?
And the main guy that was behind it was a guy named Andy Basiago. And Andy Basiago claimed that he was going through the jump room as a kid. It was a DARPA project, and he was being moved from the East Coast to someplace in New Mexico. I can't remember the name of the place in New Mexico, Santa Fe, New Mexico. And he was doing this, and everybody said, Basiago's insane. And then he said Obama went with him. Obama was one of the jump room teams, and Obama had been on Mars and stuff like that. And so it was a big story, but he was running for president, and everybody said Basiago's insane. So of course, as soon as Tim Taylor showed me this, I contacted Basiago. I said, hey, Andy, you were in the building. Were you in the front building or the back building? Because there's two buildings there, and it has this parkade in between them. So I said, were you in the front building or the back building? And then he said, I don't remember. I was a little kid. I don't remember if it was the front building or the back building. And then Chris Bledsoe's son says, Tim Taylor told him he belongs to a group out of Nassau, where it was started by, what was the guy that did the anti-gravity stuff? Townsend Brown. It was started by him, and they had discovered time travel, and Tim Taylor was a part of this time travel thing. And he showed me the same time travel thing, and then when it was there was all sorts of other things. So I had one where Gaia is interviewing John Alexander. You know who John Alexander is. So John is this. Sorry. He's a military, so he's a big military guy. Ran a big program for the government. He's trying to get UFO stuff, and he ran this group of all these high level SCI guys, and they're trying to figure out the UFO world so they can get government funding. And this is 1985, and he's a Green Beret guy, head of non-lethal weapons for the U.S. military and stuff. Was at Los Alamos and stuff like that. So anyway, so Sid Goldberg at Guy is interviewing him, and he says to him, he keeps asking questions as they go in the parking lot. What about this? What about that? And then he said, John suddenly says to him, he's getting in his car, and he says, look, it's not about the UFOs. It's about the portals. And he gets in his car and drives away. I said, he said that? He actually said that to you? And that's when I follow Ron Pandolfi. And it's a long story. We may have to do another show. But Ron Pandolfi, the thing with Ron Pandolfi, I got him on camera. I'm the only guy that ever got him on camera. He's never been on camera. He's on camera. They were doing a cruise through the Panama Canal. And there's a guy filming, and him and his wife and a friend of his by the name of John Sillison is there. And Dan Smith, the scribe, is there. And they're sitting in, most of it you can't understand because there's always a 25-mile-an-hour wind on a ship. You don't realize this. And they're filming it, and it's all this noise of this wind, because the ship's moving at 25 miles an hour. So you can't hear anything on board. But they have one inside the restaurant, and they're inside this restaurant, and they're talking. And at one point, his wife says to him, and one of his code names is Footman. So she says, so Footman, what do you say? And so Pandolfi, the only time he's ever been caught on camera, says, people have always wondered what it's like to go into the next world. There's been a breakthrough. And soon, the next time he looks over this John guy, and this John Sillison guy is cleaning his glasses, and John looks at him like, and he says, next time John goes to the desert, a number of us here will go into the next world and come back again. And I go, thank you, Jesus. And I grabbed it off, and he was mad. Cameron's a thief. He stole us. You put it on your wife's YouTube channel. And I grabbed it. Like, it was just like unbelievable that when he found out I had this tape of him talking about portals. And this is the whole deal. Was the story is his wife is an extraterrestrial, that she came in through a portal, and she came in, and her father was like an ambassador to Kashmir. And that when they went to the White House, they exchanged the daughter for the portal. And Ron ended up marrying this girl. She was only 5 years old at the time. And then she grew up, and then he met her. And this is this whole backstory that this is Ron's in charge of the portal. And it's so he says loons and crooks. So every time you bring up Lou Elizondo or guys like Hal Puthoff and stuff, he says loons and crooks. And I think what he means is if you're talking about anti-gravity technology, you're a loon or a crook. And at one point he said, people, all these billionaires, they used to go after billionaires, and they wanted billionaires' money for their crazy ideas. And they ran out of billionaires, so now they're going after Congress. And that's his idea. The whole thing with Congress is these guys are going to do anti-gravity, and they want money. So they're going in there scaring the living daylights out of these Congress guys and getting money. And Ron says it's loons, crooks, and worse, because it's got nothing to do with anti-gravity. It's got to do with portals. It's time travel. That's what they've developed. And so when you see him on camera, where he didn't realize it was going to go public, and he talks about this portal thing, and I talked to the scribe, and I said, I talked to another friend of his. I said, I'm tired of this thing, Ron. It's just like it's rhymes and riddles, and you can't prove anything. And I said, I'm tired of this whole thing. Do you think I should take off? And he knows Ron's wife really well. And I said, I'm going to take off. I can't stand this anymore. And I said, hey, do you think I should stick around? And there's this long pause, and he goes, yeah, you might stick around. And then, 3 years later, I'm talking to him. We were talking about hockey. We never talk about UFOs very much. I'm talking about hockey. And he says, remember that question you asked me a couple of years ago? And I said, yeah, I remember. He said, it's real. I said, it's real? He said, yeah, it's real. And so, because Ron's wife, Pandolfi's wife, had always said to this guy, he's an artist, and she's an artist, said, I'll explain the portals to you when you're ready. But she said, it's not what you think it is. And so this whole thing, portals. So I had portals. I did the story of the portals at Mount Shasta. I had all these witnesses, stories of these people going into these portals. They call them Zendras, and documented all the people, 7 people all telling what was inside the portal, what they saw, and these weird patterns. Like they say, hey, when you're standing in there, you're sort of standing sideways, and it's like your balance is off. And the other thing is when you talk, it sounds like you're underwater. And the most dramatic case I ever heard was 2020, where 9 people were levitated into the air. And they were telling me the story. I've got 3 of them on camera telling the story. They're levitated into the air, and these beings come, and there's more beings than there are trees in the forest. And these beings start to ohm. And they said, and we were ohming, and it sounded like we were underwater. And I said, oh, to myself, I said, you're in a portal. You're in a Zendra. Because I heard enough people been inside Zendras who said you sound like you're underwater when you're talking inside one of these things. And they told this whole story about these beings all around them. And so this whole portal thing, I did 3 portal stories at Mount Shasta, and all of them had like 7, 8. One had 7, one had 8, one had 9 witnesses. And most of these I got on camera. And they didn't want to go on camera because they were Latino people. They said, oh, we don't want to be proud. We're just gardeners. We're just simple people. We don't want to be the story and stuff like that. And then you get them going, and they would all be fighting to tell the story about what they saw. And they would show me where the tree was, where the being was standing and stuff like that. And every time I've gone after portals, there's been something to it. So I would say if they've got any sort of thing, that's where you get this idea. It's not physical the way you think it is. It's this portal. It's this thing that you're not who you think you are, and you can move through these dimensions, and it's vibration, and it's way more complex than people think it is. People think there's this UFO craft, and you open it up and you go and you get the engines, but a lot of people describe there's no engine in this thing. There's nothing, and you can go instantly from one place in the universe to the other, and that destroys all the materialistic paradigm. It goes to this idea that there is only one. That what the beings said to me when I asked these beings from Great Britain. They said, "We've always been here. You're the visitor." And this idea that you hear over and again, they've been here, they're hiding or something. But there's the idea there is no out there. That's what some events say. There does not appear any there, out there. And he was briefed. And that's this whole thing. It could be this consciousness thing that we think there's an out there, and yet it's all made of mind stuff. It's all made of consciousness. The physical world is this illusion. The idea that the Easterns had of Maya, they're going to end up being right. That this is true. That it's not the world you think it is. It's this world of consciousness, or as Seth says, you manifest everything around you. There is no other rule. It's all made by us. We're creating this thing as we go along. And it's all our perceptions of things being solid and the world being flat. And there's only one galaxy. They had 1920. They had the big debate, 1920, that there was only one galaxy. And 1911, it was only in 1911 we discovered that the atom was 99.9999% space. We're just coming out of the cradle here. We think we got it all figured out. In 1870, Max Planck, in 1874, his professor told him, Max, don't go into physics. We got it all figured out. We're just so egotistical. We think we got it all figured out. We haven't got a clue. That's what it told me. I had these psychedelic experiences. And in 5 of these psychedelic experiences, I wrote a book about it. They said to me, you think you know what's going on? You haven't got a clue. And they kept on. And they did this whole thing about, and at one point I got upset and I said, okay, so I'm just here to find out what's going on. That's all I'm doing. I want to find out what's going on. You tell me what the hell's going on. And then this voice says to me, we don't know either. I said, you don't know either. And it's the whole idea. You're leveled down, but you don't know what's above you. Like you get Gresh. You get these whistleblowers. Gresh or Elizondo. They're GS-15s. What do they know? They're in middle level of government. They don't know what the GS-16 is doing. They don't know what an SES-1 does. They don't know what the people above them. The only people that know if the president's been briefed is the president and the guy that briefed him. If you're down at a GS-15 level, you don't know who's been briefed. You can make all the stories you want. You weren't there. You got to talk to the people at the top who, at the highest level you can. And forget about these people at the bottom who think they know what's going on, that are like the believers on the chart behind you. They're believers. They really don't know. The people who know are, and I confirmed and I concluded, and a lot of people agreed with me now, is that Pandolfi is the guy. Pandolfi is the highest level guy. He's the guy that's running the show.
So circling all the way back to presidential briefings, do you think they've been briefed?
I think all presidents will get briefed. They may go to the president and say, you don't need to know about this because you give you plausible deniability. That's what they do when they have news conferences and they want the Air Force. So the Air Force sends in 2 guys who don't know their hand from one hand from the left. And they go in there because they got plausible deniability. They can lie. That's the whole thing. You don't want to lie. So you say to the president, you don't need to know this, Mr. President. If there's something happens, there's a crash, we'll brief you on this and we will tell you. But so they may do that plausible deniability. But every time I've leaked a lot of documents. One of the documents I leaked, which is nobody really knows about yet, is President Johnson. President Lyndon Johnson asked for a UFO study, and a guy was writing a manuscript on it. He died, and his daughter gave it to somebody on Facebook, and they contacted me and said, "Do you like these?" I said, "Sure." And they concluded the same thing as we concluding right now. What the government is saying. Yes, UFOs exist, and we haven't got a clue. Other than that, yeah, it's hard. It's hardware. Yes, there are actually metallic ships flying around. Yes, it's real, but we don't know anything about that. It's that a core story idea, and so you get that. And every time I go, I find that the president hasn't briefed. Clinton, they said, oh, Clinton wasn't briefed. So Clinton says, oh, they may have walked around me, the bureaucrats, but he's making up stories. So he says, oh, they didn't tell me, but I asked for the Roswell crash files. And I don't believe a UFO crash at Roswell. We can't have it both ways, Mr. President. You can't say I wasn't briefed. I know what's going on. And I asked for the Roswell files. Or people say Carter wasn't briefed. But I say Carter was an A-level personality. He, if you ask him, Mr. President, what's the deal? He'll say exactly what everybody else is saying. There are many possibilities, but nobody has answers. And that's what I keep saying to people. Everybody's saying the same thing. That's why you hear when you see the government statements, we have no proof of extraterrestrials. They always use that. They parse it. You got to listen very carefully when they say it. They got to tell the truth. But that's why they use the word extraterrestrial. There's no proof of extraterrestrials. They're absolutely right. If you've got bodies and crafts, that's what some event said. Because you've got bodies and crafts does not mean you know what you're dealing with. Unless it's got a driver's license from Zeta Reticuli in his pocket. You don't know what you're dealing with. Yeah, you got a body and you got a craft, but you don't know you have no idea where this thing came from. Is it interdimensional? Is it whatever? And that's the whole thing. So I think the president is in this plausible deniability thing. Where Trump's not even interested. Biden gave approval for this panel to release it or whatever. And the story is that when the president asked for it, people say they brought me in for Trump's first briefing in 2016. They wanted some high-level Republican guys wanted me to help them, and they said they're not going to tell him. I said, what do you mean they're not going to tell him? He said, well, they're not going to tell him. I said, well, who's they? He said, well, the government people. I said, well, okay, first of all, who if Trump gets in, who's going to appoint the CIA director? Well, Trump. Who's going to appoint the national director? Trump. Who's going to appoint? He appoints everybody, even the deputies he appoints, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, or whatever. And I said, so they're the ones that are not going to tell him? If his friends, he appoints his friends, or now it's business buddies. If he appoints his business buddies to run the government and they don't tell him, whose fault is that? I mean, it's like, that's the whole deal. It's like and that's what Jimmy Carter could do. Jimmy Carter, I heard all these stories. Jimmy Carter was ruthless. He was firing people left, right, and center. So when they said to Jimmy Carter, "Oh, you're not going to know," that was the story they told that Bush. They said Bush told him, "Curiosity is not sufficient need to know," which is true, and that if you want those records, according to the rumor story, you have to go to the House Science and Technology Committee. And I said, well, number one, if the files are at the Science and Technology Committee in the House, that's pretty low level. That they're not going to have the Roswell files. That's the House changes staff every 2 years. They has to run every 2 years. It's not going to be there. And so what he's asking for from Bush, I want the files that are promised to people. I want the sighting files, because he said, I'm going to release everything except for stuff that might be national security, which means basically everything. And the sighting files, which is total waste of time, he wanted those released. And so people say, well, he didn't do it. But I said, yes, he did. Jody Powell, who is his public relations guy, went to FBI and forced FBI to release 1,500 pages of UFO files. He had a lawyer inside the CIA, and the CIA only had 1,000 pages, but Kit Green said that 14,000 pages. And this woman, they started to hide files because this lawyer from Carter's office was in there, and they started to hide the files, and she broke down crying because she couldn't get anywhere. She couldn't get anything from the CIA. And the other one, he sent Frank Press to NASA, and he said, we want another UFO investigation. And then NASA basically came back and said, you cut our budget. We haven't got money. And then everybody knew that the Blue Book thing was a PR nightmare. You don't want to, who wants to have the UFO thing on their desk? Because you're never going to convince everybody. You're just going to be under attack all the time. You're lying, you're making up stuff and stuff like that. And so they said, we haven't got money to do this. If you've got metallic hardware that you want analyzed, we'll help you with that. But we can't do the UFO study. So Carter did make a lot of efforts. Half of all the UFO documents that have been declassified under FOIA were declassified under Jimmy Carter. And people say Jimmy Carter didn't do anything. He didn't do anything with his fingerprints on it. No. But he did a lot of stuff in the background, and that's the whole thing. So you play the plausibility denial thing, or you even get lately, what's her name? Kamala Harris was interviewed on Kimmel, and Kimmel's famous for asking them, "Did you get the files?" So he says to her, "Oh, you ever have that story where they get the files about Jimmy Hoffa being murdered and the UFOs and all that kind of stuff?" She says, "Yeah, I'm interested in kind of some of that kind of stuff." And then he says, "So, did you ask for those files? And what did you say?" She said, "That's all I'm telling you." But she confirmed she had the highest level security clearance. But then I said, that's how you answer a question when it's a high level security thing, because you've got to deny the story. You have to lie about it. If it's a waived unacknowledged special access program, you've got to deny it. Otherwise you're violating security. So when I hear whistleblowers coming forward and say, I've got this highly classified secret, I say, why are you not in jail? You got to be in jail. You have no right to leak the secret. The people above you, it's like if you're running a business and some guy suddenly decides he's going to get it in for you and he starts leaking government secrets. What, are you going to give him whistleblower protection and let this guy continue to do this? I mean, in the military, they will shut down somebody so fast because all the really top secret documents are all numbered. And when you read a document, you have to sign it out. They can figure out exactly who's leaking the material. And so I don't believe that there's a big problem with these people who are leaking, is because this is a very high, it's the most highly classified, the Canadian said, it's the most highly classified secret in the United States. And you don't just go out and say, I worked on the most highly classified secret and I'm going to tell you. Why would you come and tell me? In fact, I got him years ago. I got a phone call from one of Pandolfi's buddies, and he said, U.S. intelligence said I should talk to you. And I said, seriously? Do you realize I'm a Canadian? Like, why would U.S. intelligence say to come to talk to me? And then he talked about this thing about a documentary called The Avery, which they're now going to, I think, revive. They want to do this Avery about these secret guys in behind the scenes who had security clearances, who were talking to each other and trying to figure out what's going on. Do a documentary about that. But yeah, no, I think that the president can, very few that I've seen that definitely looked like they weren't, except for Trump. Trump said he was briefed, but he really wasn't in. It's really cool. Well, do you believe now? I really don't believe. Still doesn't believe in UFOs. So they couldn't have shown him the bodies, the craft, stuff like that. And now this next briefing is supposed to take place tomorrow or the day after. Jacques Sarfati has all this mathematical stuff where I said, do you think the presidents can even understand this? Oh yeah. And it's like, yeah, give your head a shake. I don't you'll lose his attention in about 5 seconds with all that mathematical stuff.
Do you know the story from Richard Dolan's work about Jimmy Carter being briefed and then crying? I know you did a whole book about Jimmy Carter and specifically UFOs. And I was wondering, has that come up for you? Did you verify that story? Do you know more details about it?
Okay, that there again, it shows you that the president is brief. So the way that happened was I was sort of one of the main people investigating what's called the Holloman Air Force Base story. Holloman Air Force Base story is basically a story that UFOs landed, and this is where I said they gave two different stories. So it was May of 1971, according to the producer who had that film in his hands and did the documentary. So he said, and told me 6 o'clock in the morning, and there was three different vantage points where they were filming from. Told me all the details of this thing, and he was on the base and stuff like that. And the idea is that it's the first the three UFOs come and they catch this whole thing on film. It's all filmed, and there's a 15-minute color film that is supposedly showed to the president of the United States. So when I'm talking to Bob and he's telling me there's the three UFOs, and then the two go away and the one comes down and it lands and the beings come out and they get me greeted, I said, Bob, that's kind of weird. I said, if it weren't for the location and the time of day, it's morning. If it were evening and it was Wyoming, that would be close encounters of the third kind. He said, what, I didn't tell you? I said, no, you didn't tell me what? He said, I didn't tell you I gave a copy to Steven Spielberg? The documentary is 1975. And he said, I told you, Annie Spielberg, Steven's sister, worked for me. She was a line producer for us in the studio. And she said, Steven wants a copy of the documentary. So it was 1975. He gets a copy of the documentary about the three UFOs coming. The two go away. The one lands. There's an interaction between the aliens and the military officials. It's all planned. They know it's going to land. They're bringing all these high-level officials and stuff. So that's the basic story. And then he told me, he said, and after it all happened, Steven Spielberg's mother came to him and said, he said, Bob, I've seen your version of the landing and I've seen Steven's version, and I like Steven's version better. and so anyway, this is this whole story. It's this landing at Holloman Air Force Base. So a lot of people have worked on this. In fact, I tell the story. I was told back in 2002, and now Jacques Vallée's made it public, so I can make the whole story public. I was friends with Eric Davis. Eric Davis is this astrophysicist guy, very sharp guy, one of the sharpest guys, can't tell a lie, and stuff like this. He phoned me up one day and he said, you got Jimmy Carter's phone number? I said, I'm Canadian. Why would I have Jimmy Carter's phone number? And because I was doing the presidential website, I had all the stories of the presidents. So he said, you got Jimmy Carter's? No, I don't have Jimmy Carter's phone number. And I said, what do you want Jimmy Carter's phone number for? Oh, he said, I just talked to President Bush and I just talked to President Ford. I said, you did? He said, yeah. He said, I was asking about the whole administration of this film. And the rumored story was, according to what started with the Carter thing, is that there's a 15-minute color film of the Holloman Air Force Base film that's shown during the presidential briefing. So that's why he wanted to see whether Carter would confirm this story about the briefing with the 15-minute film. Because it was told by this Secret Service guy who later denied it. No, I wasn't in the briefing. He said, no, you got the story wrong or whatever, once the story became public. So anyway, the story that Eric Davis tells is he phones up. The reason he had their phone numbers is because he's a member of the Former Intelligence Officers Association, and so is Bush, and so is Ford. Whereas Jimmy Carter was not. He was never an intelligence agent, so he didn't. That's why he named his phone number. But he's got Bush and Ford. So he phones up Ford, and he said, "Did you see the Holloman Air Force Base film during your briefing?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Well, when was the briefing?" And Ford said, "I'm never going to go there." No, he said, I'm never going to tell you, don't even go there. And so that was the one. And then he phoned up Bush, and he's told the story publicly at the last Seoul conference. There's a video where he talks, and he's behind set, and he's telling the story, where he's talking to Ford. And the one part of the story he told me, he said to Bush, he said, did you see the Holloman Air Force Base film, 15-minute film, when you were briefed by President? He said, no, I didn't. I saw it when I was CIA director. And so he said to him, he said, well, because there's all these skeptics, of course, they got like 500 explanations of what this is. Oh, it's an F4, it's a A12 flame out. It's what was the other expression that? Oh, it was the cameras. It was all these nonsense things about what this was. It wasn't a UFO, it was something else. And so he said, well, was it an A12 flame out? No. Was it a psychological film? No. Was it a training film? No. Was it this? And he's going through all this sort of stuff. And then Bush said to him, it was the real deal. And there was massive security surrounding the operation. And then when he's on this skull at the Seoul conference, he tells the rest of the story. He said that when he was briefed, The guy who was briefing him didn't realize he'd been briefed. He thought he'd been briefed on the thing. And he's saying to him, "Oh, we had this landing, and this UFO landed and stuff, and the aliens came out or whatever." And then Bush says, "They were what? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?" And suddenly the briefer realized, oh, this guy's not been briefed on this. And so this is this whole deal about they only brief certain people at certain times or whatever. But he said he was never done. But that was the whole thing. So Ford admitted it, Bush admitted it, and then that was what Dolan was talking about, was this trying to get this confirmation. And that's at the National Archives and National Security Archives in Washington. There's a reporter who came across this story of this Secret Service guy, and you can find the files on this. And he was doing a documentary for PBS or something, and that's where I found the file about this Secret Service agent. And that's when they went after him, and then he denied it. He said, "No, I spilled water on the carpet in the White House and in the Oval Office, and the president gave me shit or something." And they started telling other weird stories or whatever. But yeah, that's the whole story. The president has shown this 15-minute color film of the Hallman Air Force Base just to show you this is the real deal.
And so the story about him crying, is that related to that story? And
that was the Secret Service guy supposedly told that story, that when he saw him later, that he was in his office and he was crying. But when he was confronted with the story, he said, "No, I never told that story. No, I wasn't in the briefing," and stuff like that. And this is this whole idea of the president, his religious beliefs were shattered and stuff like that. But we couldn't confirm any of that stuff with this. And we've got the Secret Service agent's name. It sort of escapes me as to who it was. But
so this is on your list of kind of low probability stuff, like maybe, but probably not, unconfirmable.
Well, I think he did. Like the other example that shows that he knew what was going on, because you say, well, Carter wasn't briefed; they never told him anything. But if you know, Tim Good was a major researcher back, and he wrote the book Above Top Secret, UFOs Above Top Secret. That's where the acronym sort of became very popular.
I did.
And he was talking to Stansfield Turner. So Jimmy Carter was that's why people say, well, Bush told him when he was CIA director. And it's not true. Bush never served a single day under Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter fired him, because Rosalind Carter said, there's no way that Bush is going to be our CIA director. So he fired him. And he actually made the joke. He said, if I hadn't fired him, he wouldn't become president of the United States. So I did him a favor. And he was
only CIA director for like a year, I think.
A year, yeah. And so he told the story. So the idea was Carter wasn't briefed, but Tim Good was dealing with Stansfield Turner, so he was very suspicious of government, almost like Clinton, very suspicious of CIA and stuff like that. So what he did is he fired Bush as CIA director, and he brought in Stansfield Turner, who was a friend of his when he was in the Navy, and he brought him on because he trusted him. So Tim Good was having conversation with Stansfield Turner for a number of years. I don't know whether it'll come up when Tim Good dies, but he had a lot of correspondence with him. And he told me, he said, the only subject he would not discuss with me was MJ-12. And MJ-12 is the key thing. He just wouldn't discuss it, which indicated that he knew what MJ-12 was. This was the control group and stuff like that. And the whole idea is the president has to know, because if you're the guy I point out, for example, the president, this idea, well, we're going to keep him out of it. Well, he's head of state. If you're dealing with the aliens are a foreign power. The only person that can negotiate a treaty with them or talk to them is the head of state. And that is the president of the United States. If the cover-up is in the government, he's the chief executive officer. He's the top of the pyramid. He has to be told. If it's in the military, he's the military commander in chief. They have to tell him because he's the top of the pyramid. If it's in intelligence, there's 18 intelligence agencies. All intelligence agencies only do one thing. People think, oh, the CIA is hiding it. So what do you think? The CIA is selling cars and steaks? I mean, the CIA only has one job, and that is to provide intelligence for people at 60,000 feet. That's the president, the executive office, and the gang of 8. That's their job. Their job is to do nothing else. The best possible intelligence to the president of the United States. So he's on the top of all these pyramids. You can't cut him out. You can't cut him out all these things. You can't have a GS-16 down in CIA negotiating with aliens. You simply can't do it. And that's the whole idea, is this plausible deniability that the president knows, because the latest thing that Jim Semivan said is the whole UFO program has got nothing to do with Congress. Congress has no oversight, and that is because what he says happened, and this makes sense, is that President Eisenhower signed what's called a PED, a Presidential Emergency Action Document. And there's been 19 or 20 of these things that have been written, and none of them have been declassified. Nobody even knows really what they are, except one is continuity of government, How do you protect the government if there's a nuclear attack? One is the Presidential Security Service. How do you protect the president? Where the business, all the routes and stuff. They're never going to declassify any of that kind of stuff, all that Secret Service stuff. And the other one is an alien attack. An alien attack is going to be something that if you're in FEMA, you have to know about. You've got to have a plan, even if you don't believe there's aliens. Someone says, well, what if there's aliens? Well, we should have and people love that in government. You can make a project and everybody's got the job and you can do it for 10 years and stuff. So they would have a contingency plan if there was an alien invasion. And this is what Eisenhower did. He wrote, was according to Semivan, and Semivan got the big briefing. Semivan said it was a PED. It was a confusion. This never should have happened. He wrote this PED. And what the PED says is, it's run by the executive office. It has nothing to do with Congress. The president is running this operation, this black operation, and we do the bigot list. And the bigot list is the list of people who have access. And the president says, you, me, that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy are on. Nobody else is on this. No congressman, nobody. And the PED, so Congress has no oversight because it's not their program. They have oversight over stuff that they have, but the president is running this, and that's what Semivan says. The problem is it's an executive office program. It's being run out of the office. So it would make sense that the president knows the whole operation because it's actually being run out of the White House. Everybody thinks it's a law, and that's the whole thing behind security clearances. Is people say it's a law. Security clearances are not law. Security clearances are executive order. They're written by the president of the United States. All security clearances are given out of the executive office of the president. It started in 1942 when they're trying to protect the atomic bomb. When Roosevelt said we're going to classify documents, need to know security classification, compartmentalization, and there's going to be confidential and secret documents. Eisenhower, Truman added top secret. Then they added special access programs and stuff like that. And it was the president. So if you're in the government and somebody will say, "Oh, I've got a security clearance 18 points higher than the president." Baloney, you do. The president doesn't have a security clearance. The president is the one that makes the security clearance. Everybody that gets a security clearance has to thank the president of the United States because that's where they're operating out of. And so it's not a law. It's just it's an operation out of it's a regulation for top secret, all that kind of stuff. It's not a law. So laws are created by Congress. So Congress doesn't have any say on security clearances. Most people don't know. Semivan pointed this out. Most congressmen and senators are only cleared at a secret level. They don't even have top secret clearances. If you're on armed services or intelligence, you get a top secret clearance. And if you're on energy, you might get a Q clearance for atomic energy stuff.
But that doesn't give you special access clearance.
And so that's what the whole idea is. They think that Congress is running this whole thing. They only run what they do. And there's always this fight between the executive branch and the congressional branch as to who's got the more power. And they're always trying to pull power. And now they're trying to pull power. That's where people say, well, Trump's going to release. And I go, well, the one problem I got with that is Trump is got 13 billionaires in his cabinet. These are all super guys who have corporations. He's going to lower the corporate tax rate from 21 down to 13. All the crafts are controlled by corporations, Lockheed Skunk Works, Boeing, all this sort of stuff. And what you're going to say to me that these guys put him in office. They gave him all these big contributions to run the campaign and win the thing. And he's now going to take the crafts from the corporations and bring them and put a new swamp with all sorts of government people and gives control to the government over the crafts. There's no way he's going to take it away from the corporations. These are the guys that put him in power. He's just going to say how much money to keep it secret. And they'll say $1 billion. Okay, Mr. President, here's my $1 billion. And they're just, whatever. There's no way he's going to turn into corporations. There's absolutely no way. Because he's trying to reduce the government and move it to private enterprise. There's no way he's going to take the crafts. And the other thing I say about crafts, people don't even think about all this sort of stuff. And Eric Walker, the guy with 14 honorary doctorate degrees, asked us about this. He said, look, may I ask you a question? When you figure it out, what are you going to do with it? It's just curiosity, admit it. It's just curiosity. You're just curious as to what's going on. What are you going to do when you figure it out? And that's what I say to people. So if you get this disclosure thing, and Lockheed Skunk Works and Boeing and Raytheon have to hand back their saucers, so what are you going to do with the saucers? I mean, you get this Tim Burchett is the big mouthpiece in the house. He's got a house. He's got a horse farm. Where he's going to take his little wagon, hitch it up to a couple of horses, go up to Lockheed and get a flying saucer and take it to his barn and start working on it. They don't know what to do with a flying saucer. What is the government going to do? They're going to give it to people to figure it out. Who's the people that figure it out? Lockheed Skunk Works. They're going to give it back to the same people that took it from. It's a crazy idea that you're going to take it from the people and you're going to give it, or people say no, they'll give it to other people. So Bob Bigelow, the big guy that ran the OSAP program, gave $31 million to the Republican Party. So does that get him a flying saucer? Does he get to have a flying saucer? Elon Musk gave $100 to $250 million to Trump for the election. So does he get a flying saucer? Who are you going to give the flying saucers to? And this is what people don't realize. They say, we want disclosure, but you got to think it through on the other end. What are you going to do? As Walker said, when you get it, what are you going to do with it? Nobody has any idea, because the whole thing has this consciousness interface. And if Lockheed has been working on it since 1947 and they can't figure it out, but the problem is that all these guys on the outside are scientists and engineers, and what you're trying to do, I call it stealing the saucers. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to force it into the white world, where they have a chance to work on it, and then they can get patents. Because the one Tim Taylor invention that he got, the company that and I don't know how much the invention was of the company, but the company that had that invention in it, this medical invention, sold for $100 million in NASDAQ. There's a lot of money that's involved in this whole thing. So if you're a scientist and you're trying to shake out the saucers, the hardware from Lockheed Skunk Works into the white world, so I can work on it, because I want to make money. I want to win a Nobel Prize. I want all this kind of stuff. That's what's going on here. It's this fight for power in terms of money and who's going to control this stuff. Because everybody knows, if you get this, you rule the world. And the technology is just unbelievable in terms, once you start to understand how complex this is and what these crafts can actually do.
So is it your impression that a group of people know, including some presidents, and they don't understand fully this phenomenon, and if they wanted to tell us, they probably couldn't explain it because it's just too complicated, and the incentive system as it currently exists basically disincentivizes them from sharing incomplete information? Does that about sum up your view?
Yes, sort of. Or the example I always use is, you're not going to stand the president up in front of 2,000 reporters with cameras flashing and stuff like that, and then they say, okay, Mr. President, what's going on? And Obama actually said this. He said, yes, I'm being serious here. We have crafts, we have films, but we don't know what they are. And so you stand the president. The president is this powerful guy. And it's all this idea that you're relying on the government. The government is your savior. They're doing all this sort of stuff. And then the president steps and says, okay, so how does it work? We don't know. Where are they from? We don't know. What are they doing here? We don't know. And the question to everything is, we don't know. And that sort of brings the president into this position where he's supposed to be the guy who has all the answers. It's like Donald Trump. Like, he's on this thing, I'm going to push on Tuesday. I'm going to push for Donald Trump, this thing where he says, give me 24 hours. I'll tell you, the drones Biden's hiding the drones. He's telling, he knows what's going on with the drones. First day, I'll tell you. Don't worry, I'll tell you. So I'm going to be going after Ron Pandolfi. Okay, where's this report? Where's the drone report? And it's the old deal. He's not going to know. He's put his foot in his mouth. They don't know what the drones are about. They have no clue what's going on. And once you get the president in a position where he looks inept, that he can't do anything, or that you really don't know, then everything starts to crumble, because everybody's built on the world being settled and everything stays the same and stuff. And when it's suddenly like everything sort of falls out, and you suddenly realize the consciousness thing, that this thing may not be as physical as we think it is, and all this kind of stuff, it's just way too much. Plus, how do you explain it? I mean, there's not much you can tell the population anyway. So why bother risking all this kind of stuff? Just kick it down the road. Say, the next president can work on this, and just hope that. And that's what Eric Davis says. Every 7 years, they take it off the shelf and look at it again with new scientists, and hope that they can figure it out. And you're just waiting for us to catch up. But you may have a little bit like metals and stuff that they've sort of figured out, or little things. But the basic thing, as far as Semi-Van says, he said, I will bet a year of my retirement salary that they have no clue. They have no clue what they're dealing with. And when you hear a guy like that say that, and he's making this bet, you get the idea that they may be playing, and the people that are playing the game are the people that are in front of Congress. That we've got this all figured out. They're flying around these ARVs and stuff like that. But I say that's all weapons of mass destruction too. What you're doing is you're going in there saying evil aliens. They're shutting down nuclear missile silos. They're getting aware of our planes. And I say, no, what do you mean? Well, your planes, your airspace. It's their airspace. They were here first. Get your damn planes on the ground. I mean, you're interfering with their airspace. And we got this idea, but you scare the congressman, because if you say, it's UFOs, congressman will tell you, get out of here and don't let the door hit you on the way out. But if you say to them, they're eating people and they're kidnapping your kids and there's nothing you can do about it and stuff like that, it's like, well, how much money do you want? And everybody's going to walk away with bad bags full of money, and that's what it's all about. It's all the stuff is about. Even you talked about OSAP, where Reed got them another $10 million, but they didn't word the thing properly, and some other department in the Pentagon stole their money, and that's what it's about. It's everybody in Congress. Like, if you're a one-star general, what do you want? You want to be two-star general. You need more people. You need more stuff. If you're a billionaire, you need $2 billion, and that's what it is inside this fight for money inside the Pentagon. Everybody's fighting for money. And so that's what happened with the OSAP program. When the black guys with the real program heard that OSAP were knocking on the doors and wanted their back engineering, their flying saucers, they went, who does these guys think they are? There's no way these guys are coming in here, and they shut them down. So when Reed wrote that letter, he wrote the letter to the deputy Pentagon guy at Defense. He wrote the thing, and he said the fact that he wanted the whole thing moved into a black budget program. So people are now saying, oh, we want freedom, we want disclosure. You got to remember that the senator who got the money for OSAP wanted it put in a black budget program. And if he had been successful, you never would have heard of OSAP. You would never would have heard of ATIP. You would have heard of nothing, because it would have been in the black world. The only reason it got was because it didn't go into the black world and it leaked out. It wasn't highly compartmentalized. And then we now know that this other program, but it was just a rinky-dink program. That's why I think they shut it down. It was like, we don't need this. We're already working on this. Shut these guys down. There's a threat to security. We don't want more people in this program. It's very compartmentalized. We've only got a few people right into this thing, and these new guys are coming in. They're going to try to steal our damn saucers, and there's no way they're stealing. So as soon as he wrote that letter, that's when they shut OSAP down, and that was the big boys shut them down. They said, shut this program down right now, and that was the end of it.
What do you think are the prospects of us learning more as a civilization in the next few years?
Well, I think we're learning at an incredible rate now. I think the stuff that's coming out now in terms of the OSAP, what OSAP discovered and all this kind of stuff, I think we're learning at an incredible rate. Even in the research on telepathy and parapsychology, we're never going to figure any of it. It's always going to be left to a point where the skeptics can always walk away from it. No paranormal phenomenon has ever been figured out. Nobody's ever got a firm confirmation of any paranormal phenomenon. So it's always going to be that thing where, because it's this nebulous thing that it's not the physical world, that unless you go into that other world, you're not going to understand how it works. And even then, you may not understand how it works, because it may be a level higher than that. So, but I think we're making great headways. I mean, because I said numerous times, this whole thing about the government releasing the fact that they're working on flying saucers. I mean, I was in it from 75 till 2017. You would ask me in 2017, I would say, not a chance in hell. No way. It never happened. And when it happened, I went, oh my God, I couldn't believe it happened. It was, and then we never thought it would happen. But that's the whole thing. And you've got enough people in Congress who are very upset, and they're pushing this stuff, and the whistleblowers are coming out, and you're getting more and more aspects to the story. And the Pandolfi, we may actually, Pandolfi's retiring, and we're going to push him to do an interview, and because I as I told you, I confronted him. I said, you keep saying, oh, this is wrong, that's wrong, this guy's a loon, this guy's a crook, whatever. How about you tell us? And because he said, oh, you're screwing it all up, you're making up stories and stuff. I said, well, if you stood up and told us what was going on, I would do less guessing. If you stand up and tell us what's going on, and he said, okay, make a list of questions, and we'll have a debate. I said, I don't want a debate. I just want you to tell me what's going on. You're at your level, and if you tell me honestly what's going on at your level or whatever, it's more than what I know. I'm not going to argue with you. Why would I argue with you? You're the guy with the keys. I wouldn't argue with you. But he wanted to have this debate. So he offered me that, and I said, no, I don't want to debate. I just want. And I said, moreover, you're still on duty, and as long as you're on duty, I don't believe a damn thing you're saying. And it's true. As long as you're on duty, it's a violation of national security. He's going to lose his security clearance. He could go to jail. He knows he's the guard. He's the gatekeeper. He's not going to violate security. One guy, there was a meeting where he's supposed to show up at a meeting, and the guy said, I'm going to get Ron to tell you something. I said, he's not going to tell me anything. Yeah, he's going to tell you. I told him he's going to tell you something. I said, I'm a Canadian. I'm not even an American, and it's national security. What, he's going to tell me something? Come on, he's not. And the guy Pandolfi never came to the meeting. But that's the thing. They're not going to tell you, and you got to admit that's the rules. Play on their side of the rules. That's the rules. They're not going to release this stuff. It's national security, whatever because this is fear, 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 fear. And you've got levels and levels and levels of security because the fear is 450 million guns and all these weapons and stuff. And we more weapons, and we figure we're better, and we've got more fear, more enemies. Now we're going to take over Canada. Now we're going to take over Greenland. And it's just this spiral. But that's what national security does. If you're in the Pentagon, that's what you do. You have to have if you haven't got an enemy, make one, because otherwise your budget is gone. You want to make the world look like a really scary place because that's what keeps you employed.
So what would you recommend for people who are new to the subject, or people who are passionate about UFOs but frustrated by the limited information? Just like, how should we think about the subject in the years ahead, and what, if anything, should we kind of try to do in our own research, or to what kind of culture should we cultivate within our own community?
Well, again, the thing I think we've missed that we've always got to go back to is you look around and find somebody who's actually had the experience. And if you can get 10 of those people and then compare what they're saying and find out what they're doing. I always try to keep people away from the idea of trying to prove to UFOs, because we've tried to prove UFOs for 80 years and it's like the latest thing. And we get taken for scams. You get taken because what everybody's doing is they think, oh, disclosure is going to come with the next video. And then some guy hoaxes a video and they put it out and he goes, oh, here's the video. And everybody goes and they're posting it. And it's like, it goes viral and everybody's going. And then 4 months later, someone shows it's a hoax. And then everybody goes, oh, I knew it was a hoax. And then they go back to waiting for the next video and next video. And we're so easy to take the bait because everybody's trying to get the jump on everybody else in terms of getting that video. The whole story is already there. There's not going to be some piece. And we think that we've got all these pieces of the puzzle and there's just one piece of the puzzle. We put that one piece, we're going to get the whole thing. The more I look at it, the more there's no pieces. They're all over the place and nothing makes any sense. So for a new person, it's that idea of go to people that have not opinions, but have experience at it, and then get the more and more evidence in that field, gather that evidence and watch that evidence to try to get what the answer is. Same pattern I used was trying to find the highest level person you can, or the experiencer, or I'm really big into channeling. I realize that there's this very common message. And I have my $1,000 challenge that anybody thinks they can channel and fool me. I got a $1,000 challenge because there's certain things that channelers will do that we know that they do, that we can actually test, and nobody can duplicate. There's no way nobody can duplicate. But so I watched that because I always have this idea that somebody's in the field. So you may have somebody who's at a high hypnosis level that starts to get material or whatever, or you talk to people like Bergine, the guy who invented the microprocessor. There's more and more of these people coming out all the time who are talking about these enlightenment experiences that they had, where suddenly, boom, they had this spiritual experience or whatever. And these, like the guy won the award for the top invention of the 20th century or whatever, stuff like that. And you start to realize that there's these people out there who are telling these stories, and you get the realization that the world is not the way we think it is. So don't rely on your impressions, your five senses, because it's always been wrong. Everything that we've seen has been wrong. We just keep having things, even now, and it just sort of slides by, where sort of people get away with it, because it used to be 100 billion galaxies. First, we had this argument in 1920, and there was this fight between the guy who ran Harvard University astronomy and this other guy. And the one guy said, no, there's more than one galaxy, but we're at the center of our galaxy. Wrong. And the other guy said, no, there's only one galaxy, and we're not at the center of our galaxy. Wrong. And these guys were having this battle. And then they said, there's now that went up to 100 billion galaxies. And all of a sudden I'm reading this article and it said, we've got 2 trillion galaxies. And I go, are you kidding me? We went from 100 billion to 2 trillion galaxies. You're out by 20 times. And it wasn't even a story in science. It's like, and that's the whole thing. People think that the scientists have got the answer. They've got some of the answers, but they're going to be wrong. And the number of galaxies could be unlimited. You never know. You just keep going. And even now, the thing with the Webb telescope, where they suddenly realize these new galaxies, these galaxies should be small galaxies at the beginning of the universe, and they're the same as the other ones. And it's like the whole idea of the Big Bang is now in jeopardy, and that now they're saying it's 27 billion years old. And you see that all these things fall apart, and that's what you got to realize, is that science will advance. And what they told me in the psychedelic thing, you think you understand everything, you haven't got a clue. Young kids have to know that that if you get arrogant and you sort of settle as to there's one guy, because people are looking for one person, one religion, one scientist who's got all the answers. And then you go down that road, you start to believe and you start to defend them and stuff like that. Nobody's got the answer. Everybody's sort of working at that sort of thing. And if you get into a trap, and that's the problem I have, it's like this piled higher and deeper. When you get into somebody who's got a PhD from MIT and they spend $50,000 a year for tuition, and then you come and say, well, this is wrong, that's wrong. You bet they're going to defend it. Like, you're going to tell me that all that money I spent and it's wrong? There's no way. They're just going to dig their heels in and defend their worldview, because they got so much at stake. So keep an open mind and watch the people who are having the experiences, and realize it's this unbelievable universe that I think is actually opening up. I think, like some people say, the veil is thinning or whatever, that you just see more and more of this stuff from 75 till now. It's so much weirder. There's so many more stories and so many more people coming out with these weird, not just UFO stories, but paranormal stories and stuff like that. And we also have AI. So now you can actually go where you can actually use AI to pull certain stories. Like, how many people have flown a craft, and it'll pull this stuff out. And everything's just moving so fast in terms of technology, in terms of what we can do. And that's almost like it was given. I read a book that's coming out that talks about this was a gift. The computer was given to us, because if you realize how many people are doing LSD, that invented computer things, all the virtual reality, all sorts of stuff, it was all people doing LSD. And it was this idea that we've sort of been given that. And what you see, it's the reflection of the universal consciousness. So what I say is, people say, oh, it's going to be artificial intelligence, going to know all this sort of stuff. I say, you can take all the computers in the world. And I think it's like, if you take cell phones, there's like 14 billion computers in the world. You can link them all up. You can set them all up. You can put chairs in front of them. You can do all that sort of stuff. But it's not until you sit a consciousness in front of one of those and plug the thing in, and the consciousness programs the computer. Nothing happens with consciousness. There's no internet. The internet is just a collection of consciousness on the internet, and it's this reflection. And we're now at the point almost where it's like the universal consciousness, the Akashic field, where you could put something into a Google search or into an AI search, and it will find it instantaneously. We're at that thing where the research is happening so fast in terms of what we're able to do with artificial intelligence. And you see this Moore's law. It's still it's still doubling every 2 years. And you see what's going to happen in another couple of years. And that's why I say that the book that I wrote on the experiences flying the ship is so important, because these people are describing the same AI technology, that the craft is alive. Or the person will say, the other thing they'll say, the being will say, and there's a number of experiences say this. So, are you going to make up this story? They say, Susie Hansen says, they take me on board the ship and they say, okay, we're going to make the ship bigger. Watch. And she says, the walls start to go. The walls are white. She says, the white walls. And she says, eventually, the walls are so far away, she can't even see the walls. Or this whole thing, the guy goes into there and the being is there, and he said, hang on. And he goes like this, and a book comes out of the wall. You start hearing those things about this, people telling me same sort of stories, and you realize this is artificial intelligence in the future, that the artificial intelligence is still controlled by the beings, but it's this bio thing. So people are taking these things. We're going to get a pile of rocks, and the more rocks we get, and then suddenly the rocks are going to become so big and so complex that suddenly the consciousness is going to jump out and say, "Hey, I'm Grant. I'm consciousness. Here I come." And the idea is you need bio stuff. And there's even a guy by the name of Steve Mira who will, if you've ever interviewed him, he's in Great Britain. Steve Mira will talk about bio boards, that he'd worked on this years ago. And this is, I think, the next revolution, is that you, instead of using silicon, you use DNA, you use biology to store. DNA can store huge amounts of material. And that's where the revolution, and that's what you see these experiences, 36 experiences, all telling exactly the same story, that the craft is alive, it's conscious. And this is so you're looking at artificial intelligence in the future. And that's why these stories are so important. But you got to talk to the people who are actually having the experiences. You can't, as I say, you can look at lights in the sky for the next 1,000 years, and you're never going to solve it by counting red ones, green ones, fast and slow ones. You've got to get to what the bottom line is. Except UFOs exist, and okay, let's move on. Even if that's wrong, let's move on and let's see what the next step is.
I will bring this in for a landing soon, but I have a couple more questions if you're available.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. One is spiritual development. On this point of consciousness, do you have a meditation practice? Are there things that you're investigating or doing in your own life to raise your vibration or engage with the Akashic field, or just explore your interaction with it?
I try a lot. I've read a lot of them. But people say you got to use meditation. Don't use psychedelics. I got a big thing when I did this 27 psychedelic psilocybin. No, you got to do meditation. I said, I'm 71 years old. I haven't got time to do 30 years of meditation. No, I'm not going to do meditation. So that's why I said I want to get in the field. I know you're going to get in the field. I knew it was like a roller coaster. I knew I was going to hate it. I hated every single session I did. It was absolutely horrifying. I just I had to take weeks to do each session. So I tried a lot of them. Some are interesting. The healing thing I tried with. I won't get into that, but Bankston healing, if you ever done that, that's a really interesting story. And I tried a lot of them. The technique I used that I found worked the best, psilocybin worked, but it was just horrendous. And the first 15 were really good because when I went into the session, all I said is, okay, I'm here. I'm here to learn. What do I need to learn? I didn't have any impressions. I want to learn this. I want to know that. I'm here for the first 6 were really good. I knew within 15 minutes what their lesson was, what they were going to teach me. So there was that. But the one I really works for me, there was the one from Colin Anders. That's where and it happened accidentally. I'm in Colin Anders' lecture. I am not interested in crop circles. He was talking about crop circles. Couldn't care less. He was talking about consciousness crop circles, but I wasn't interested. I'm thinking, I'm sitting there and I'm daydreaming. I'm thinking, I should go for lunch. I should go outside. And I thought, well, no, he's a very prominent lecturer. He's very, very famous. I've never seen him lecture. I should sit here and pay him respect and watch his lecture. So I wasn't paying attention. And that is basically shutting the left brain down. You're shutting the left brain down. And as soon as I shut the left brain down, boom. So I've had my 2 major experiences in that method where I do a lot of walking. I walk about at least 4 hours a day. And so I'm walking. And then your left brain shuts down. And then this idea will come in your head. I've always have a pen and a piece of paper in my pocket and I'll write it down. A lot of them, I won't even read the paper again, but that's my technique. And that's one of the 72 modalities or 73 modalities, these contact modalities that's the one that works best for me is that I find the odd time is meditation. If I start meditation, but it always gets me upset because I get all set and I get to meditate. And it's like 30 seconds later, it's like an idea comes in my head and it's like, can you not wait till I actually get going here? And because now I got to get up and I got to get the pen and so I do get the odd one or in the shower. I'll get in the shower. And again, it's the same sort of thing. It's the ability to shut down the little voice in your head, the male ego mind, and let the female mind that believes in oneness. Because the left brain believes in me, more stuff, toys, all this kind of stuff. The right brain is the female brain. It's let's all be together. Let's all be one. Let's be a family. All this kind of stuff. Let's not have a war stuff. The man is like we're having urinating contests and my gun is bigger than your gun and all this kind of stuff. And that's basically what it comes down to. So I've had a little bit of experiences, but the ones that happened to me, and I know when I'm in the field. I know like if I'm working on a computer or something, like if I start to write and suddenly you get in, people call it in the zone, where you get in the zone, and then I get into this thing. And the way I describe downloads, because I said the hardest thing about downloads to explain to people is the fact it comes with absolute certainty. That's not, you can't believe that. You've got to know that. You've got to experience that, where this is the answer. And so when I get that, I know, say I'm going along and I know, shit, I'm in the field. And this comes to me and I know this is real. And I get excited. And the way I describe it, the only thing I can think that relates is if we were to stay there. Remember we played sports when we were a kid. Remember that kid? He was really good. He's that soccer player. He scored all those goals. And you say, oh, that was Ralph. Oh, yeah. And it's that idea. It's like, oh, yeah. It comes into your head like someone, you knew it before and someone shows it to you again. You go, oh, yeah, I forgot. That's who it is. That's the feeling you get. It's like, oh, yeah. And it's like, yeah, that's real. And you'll hear, like Fagin talked about this. And, what's his name? Tesla talked about this, where he would go all his inventions in his head. He would work all the processes in his head before he would actually write it on a piece of paper. He would actually work through it. So this idea that there's a field that has access to everything. And it's this ability to get into an alpha state, I guess. People have different methods. Even Gary Nolan, if you heard Gary Nolan from Stanford University, when he talked about it. So he talked about it and he said, I don't know how it works. He has the genetics lab at Stanford University. He said, I don't know how it works, but I know how to make it work. I don't know if there's little elves in my head or what's going on, he said, but I know how to make it work. He said, I work through the whole problem and I go through all the solutions. He says, like an FBI thing, and I draw little lines between the different things. And I'm looking at all these things, all the different possibilities. And he said, and then I let it go. That's the whole thing. Shut down the left brain, let it go, goes to bed. He said, I put that on a piece of paper. I put it beside the bed. And then he says, either the next morning over the next couple of days, the answer, not an idea, the answer comes into my head. And so I said, can I quote you on this? Because that was my main, is when I got the download, I said, hey, I wonder if everybody else has got this. And then the first thing I got was Paul McCartney, the song Yesterday, biggest produced song of the 20th century. He's sleeping and suddenly the song's in his head and he writes it down and he goes to everybody. He said, you heard the song? No, I heard. He thought somebody else had sung the song and he picked it up. And I realized all these musicians were getting songs and they were claiming they came in dreams, or it suddenly came in their head. And these were the biggest songs of all time. Let It Be came in a dream with McCartney's mother coming to him in a dream, and all these weird sort of stories. I realized, there's actual thing to this. And the more I moved along, I realized that, as I said, there's more and more scientists now coming forward admitting that this is where they got their ideas from. Because there was actually a study done at Stanford started in 1915, where they took a look at the what was it? How many was it? 1,500 of the smartest kids in California, 1,530 smartest kids in California. They had 140 IQ to get in. 25% of the kids had an IQ of 180 or above. And they followed these kids starting in 1910. It was called the Turn Study, I think it was. But anyways, it started in 1910. They followed these kids all the way through their lives. Nobody ever invented anything. Nobody. They had one that was the head of the American Psychological Association. Otherwise, they all got university degrees. But if you take a look at university degrees, it's basically left brain. It's memorize. And so they followed them. And they had two people that had won Nobel Prizes that were looked at the study, and they said, no, we're not going to let these kids in the study. They're crazy. They wouldn't let them in the study. They didn't achieve anything, because and that's where the idea comes that the things that the intelligence is not the people who are the smartest. It's the people who have the insight that are able to tap into that field. It was just bizarre how they had 1,500 kids, and they were just ordinary kids. They were ordinary people. There was nothing really different about them. They all had university degrees and stuff. And the thing was that Turin, the guy that ran the study, would give them all recommendations to go to university. So they all had some sort of university degree. But
yeah, this is the Terman study, just for people to find it.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. So that's that inspiration thing that I say, whatever works for people will know. But you can get in the field. There are various techniques, but it's basically all about that little voice that's telling you can't do it, and who wants to talk, who wants to go for dinner, and this sort of stuff. We know now for a fact that that's basically what it is, and that's why it's so important with these kids who are nonverbal autistics. Because if you're nonverbal, the verbal is in the left side of the brain, and when that's what Diane Powell said. I knew that these would be the kids to investigate, because their left brain is they have left brain damage. Same as this guy I mentioned, this guy that could do calendar calculate. He had left brain damage. He couldn't button his shirt. Same as the Rain Man. Rain Man couldn't button his shirt. He could memorize 12,000 books backwards and forwards, and you could go to any page in 12,000 books and you could tell what was on there, but he couldn't button his shirt. That was all left brain stuff, but it was all being recorded, and he was able to access it. So there is this field that you can access where people can do it, and that's where we got to go. We got to go to these bizarre people. It's almost like the paranormal phenomenon. If you've got some kid who's got this bizarre ability to speak foreign languages, you either say this phenomenon exists or it doesn't exist. If you say it exists, then that means something in our world is not right. Something we believe is not right. And that's what Gary Nolan says. He says, I'm not interested in 95% of stuff that falls within the bell curve. I'm interested in the 5% outside the bell curve. That's where the Nobel Prizes are. It's the paranormal. It's the stuff that doesn't make sense. That's what you got to investigate, and that's where you're going to have the discoveries. Who said it? Einstein. You cannot solve a problem using the same information that you used to create the problem. If you're just repeating the same thing over, you're never going to discover anything. You got to go to the paranormal stuff, the stuff that doesn't make any sense, and then you get these inspiration ideas that will give to you an idea, or you talk to the experiencers who didn't tell you what it means. And that's what I would say in terms of, I've had a lot of downloads in my life, some sort of, and a lot of them I ignore now. I just figure like, nah, it's kind of cool. Sometime I'll remember it. I don't really write them down anymore, but I do know when I'm in the field. I know the difference between my voice and this sort of, you know what that is.
That's fascinating. Okay, last one. This is from my mom. She wanted to know, in your years of research, what surprised you most? What comes to mind when I ask just what were the most surprising events? What floats up as a top one, top three, top
There's
five.
no doubt about it. Number one is the consciousness thing. As I said, I couldn't have spelled consciousness in 2012. When I got that, my whole career changed. I really basically didn't do UFOs anymore. I basically said, wow, my life just shifted 100. I suddenly realized not only was I on the wrong train, I was on the wrong train going the wrong way. I was absolutely out to lunch. And the other thing that changed for me was the extraterrestrial thing. The more I go along, the more I believe this is not extraterrestrial. It seems to be much more complex. It's not that there's not beings coming to us, and they may be coming from different. They may have developed out of some system where they learned to go to the fifth level, and this planet learned to go to the fifth level. But it's the fifth level people are coming to us. There may be that, but in terms of biological beings, that's something that really shifted for me more and more as I go along. And I guess the whole, like Jacques Vallée had that sort of thing where I used to think he was absolutely insane. Now it's like he was on before anybody else, that this is not what people think it is. Like he even said, the extraterrestrial thing doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's got to be more complex than that. So those would be the two things, the extraterrestrial thing, how that shifted, and by far the consciousness thing, because that's where I suddenly realized, like, wow. And now I even quit. Now I did a book talking about disclosure, why I believe the government shouldn't disclose the nuts and bolts stuff, because they're just going to build weapons with it, and you should disclose the real thing about what's really going on here. The reason I sort of dropped out, and I actually got to the point where I said, I think I know what's going on. I'm content, because that was my whole thing. I want to know what's going on. And the combination of consciousness and the levels and the reincarnation and Michael Newton's research and all the stuff. And I said, yeah, it's kind of boring now. I think I know. And people said, don't die yet, because I was sort of talking like a suicidal guy. I think I've got enough now. I know. And then I got that's when the telepathy tapes came up. When I ran into the telepathy tapes, I go, oh, this is cool. It's like, oh, this is where we're going now. And so it's almost like the synchronicities that happen over and over again, where I'm ready to sort of throw it in, and suddenly something happens. And you'll hear this over and over again, these synchronicities that people talk about. And even synchronicity, how do you explain synchronicity? It's with time and space. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Or the Mandela effect. I mean, you see that kind of stuff, it's like, you just shake your head and you go, like, wow, the world just gets weirder. But that's the way it is. I mean, almost like at the level of the small, as I pointed out, this thing with the proteins, the deeper and deeper you get into the small world, the more complex it gets. And people say, we're explaining this. And one thing that gave me in the download in 2016 is you're not explaining anything. You're describing. You're just describing what the thing is doing, what the cell is doing. You're not explaining anything. And science does not explain anything. It just describes. It's like Moses. He went down to the Red Sea, took a staff, he opened the Red Sea, children of Israel went through, then the troops came in behind, the ground was all dry, and then he went and the water went back. It's like, that's the trick. Okay, now how do you do a trick? Show me how to do a trick. It's one thing to explain the trick. It's another to do the trick. And that's one of the things I sort of learned from my download is they gave me 24 things. I remember I was walking down the street and this feeling comes like, oh yeah. And I started writing it down. And it was cold because I live in the coldest city in the world. And it was cold. I took my glove off and I got this piece of paper and I'm writing this stuff down. And I got to about 15 and it was the same thing. It was like, is the world random or is it pattern? Is the world, are you explaining or are you describing? You think it's this, it's actually this. You think it's this, it's actually this. And you're completely wrong. And so I'm writing this thing. I got to about 15 and suddenly the feeling went away and I put the pen back in my paper. I took about 10 steps and all of a sudden it comes back. Oh, here we go. I pulled the paper out and I kept going. I got all 24. And eventually I'll do a book on it. Luckily I wrote them down because I forgot almost every single one of them. But I did write them down and I've got them in an outline for a book. So that's one of my future books is this big download that was given to me, 24 things and it was basically the same thing. You think you know what's going on. You think it's this. No, it's exactly the opposite of what you think. It's exactly the opposite. You haven't got a clue what's going on. And that's the thing is when you look at the very small, you start to realize it gets more complex, more complex, and more complex. And you hear Tim Taylor talking about the fact that the DNA is the antenna. That's how we're picking up the stuff from the field, from the mind, is through the DNA. And that NASA uses DNA antennas. And I went, look, sure enough, the deep space antennas are built like DNA molecules and stuff like that. And if you go to the very big, then you realize that there's more galaxies, and they don't develop the way we think, and it gets more complex, and that's almost the excitement of the field is that you and I are sort of on the leading edge of development, of discovery, that we spend our whole days trying to find something new, and these new discoveries. I didn't know that. And you're going and you live in this world of excitement, almost like Bashar the Channeler says, in order to know what to do in your life, you live at your point of highest excitement. Right now, what's the most exciting thing you can do? Do it. Okay, 5 minutes from now, what's the most exciting thing? Do it. Do it. Do it. Just keep doing the most thing that's the most exciting to you, and you're on the right track. And don't overthink it, and don't expect the thing to work right now. No expectation of a result. And you go through these 4 things. When you reveal, it actually makes sense. But you and I are on this moment of excitement where you're doing a podcast every week, and you go, "Oh man, this is so cool! I didn't know this, I didn't know that." And we live on this edge of the new world, which is what more could you? One of my things I learned in my they showed me in my psilocybin thing. They showed me 2 things. One was compassion meditation, which I had no idea. Even there was a compassion meditation. They showed me 4, and I won't get into that, but it was the gratitude one. So the gratitude, I would suddenly feel totally like somebody was pouring oil over my head. My whole body, I would feel the most grateful. That I was the luckiest person in the whole world. And I'd go for an hour. Like, I'm so lucky. And I would just go crazy. And then the next thing would come, and I go, I wonder if that gratitude guy is going to come, because it was like someone pouring something over you, and it'd be waiting. Also, oh, here he is, and then you get this gratitude thing, and it was this whole thing. So I try to live in that state all the time. Gratitude that you and I, as I said, I mean, we could have been, handicapped or mentally handicapped and stuff like that, or poor or whatever, and we got this. And the next time we go around, we may be the poor person. So you got the chance to play the big game. I mean, you might as well play the big game. I mean, and appreciate what you've got. Because in the UFO field, we're always complaining. Oh, the government's why they're going to tell us this sort of stuff. And you're living in the tomorrow. You got to live in the here and now, and realize that you're part of this game, and that you got to play it.
Well, that's a beautiful landing. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today, Grant. Is there anything you'd like to say on the way out, or do you feel like you've said all the things?
No, the only thing I leave people with is my impression of how the world works based upon 50 years, that reincarnation is a fact. We come into the world, we plan. We make plans with people to do certain things. We come in to do something. When we're here, we live our lives. When we leave, according to Michael Newton, you had 7,000 regressions, all these people. You go in front of a council between 3 and 12 people, and they ask you one question: how did it work out? There's no judgment. It's basically, you planned this. How did it work out? And Michael Newton says, everybody says the same thing. I could have done better. I forgot to do this. I was going to do this. I was going to do this. And I forgot, and I was too scared to do this. I chickened out and stuff like that. And so the whole point of the whole life to me is, if reincarnation is a fact, we came into the world to do something. When we leave, they're going to ask us, what did you achieve in what you wanted to do? And therefore, when we're here, the only question we have to ask is, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing, because if you bring up Hillary Clinton, the dog ate the homework, my mother-in-law, they're going to go, time out. It's not about you. It's not about them. It's about you. You planned this. Don't blame anybody else for this. And that's what it comes down to, that idea that we're here for a reason, and to appreciate the fact that you're always going to be here. Because that's the stuff of all the stuff I've seen that makes sense, that it all fits together in terms of how we do it, and appreciate the fact that you got to be here when you start realizing how unbelievable the human body is in terms of how it works, and how many things have to work to make everything work and stuff like that. And you realize that we are very, very lucky, and to be grateful for it, and do the best you can with what you've got, with no expectation of any result. And because people get hung up in, the tomorrow, when we're going to get for tomorrow, and all this, or, it's like the idea you're either depressed because you're looking at the past, or anxious because you're looking in the future. And all the mystical literature, all the Eastern literature, all says the same thing. It's this weird idea that you may not want to tell people, is there's no time and space. All your lives are happening at the same time, here and now. There is no out there, all this kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff where it just sort of blows you away, where you realize that this is way beyond anything that we know, but we've got the mind to figure it out. And it may take you, 100 lifetimes to figure it out, but we're on the journey, and we're all helping to develop the universe. I firmly believe that we are developing the universe. I didn't believe that till maybe 10 years ago, with this idea that everything's made out of consciousness, and that there are no nouns. We want to, in science, we want to name things as nouns. We want to make them inanimate, we're a biological robot in a meaningless random universe. And it's not. Everything's a verb. We're a verb. You have 100, the millions of proteins being made every second. You have whatever it is, 3 million cells a second dying in your body, being replaced by other cells. And you start to see all this process that's going on. You realize like this is unbelievably complex machine, and that we have this opportunity to do something and do it, and you'll feel good that you're actually adding to the world, because that's what it's basically about. And enjoy the thing, which sometimes is hard to do, but because I like everybody else get stuck in the past or the future. And but it's been a great learning lesson in terms of I was raised very religious, so when I first saw it, I was supposed to be a minister, and I pulled out of that. But when I first saw it, the idea was, miracles happen, but they only happen in the Bible. And I really didn't believe there's any miracles today. So to me, it was a fulfillment of this sort of idea where you're living in this world of miracles and stuff like that, where it appears like miracles, but it's all going to be straight physics, whatever that is, the bottom line physics. But you're never going to get to the bottom. You even get that with if you've interviewed Donald Hoffman, who does the whole thing about there's no time and space are dead. This whole thing about everything's a desktop icon. That absolutely makes sense. That you're not seeing reality. You're seeing something between you and reality. And those are the kind of mistakes we make in terms of believing what we're perceiving. And what I've sort of been taught from my downloads is everything you perceive is wrong. It's not. You've got to get away from that, because you're building a wrong worldview based upon believing everything is solid and things are happening randomly when they're not happening randomly. So that's about it. That's my view of the world, and I'm glad I got to play the game. As I tell people, like, you got to realize, not only do you realize there's a Super Bowl game going on. Most people live lives of quiet desperation. They just spend their life trying to build food and watch TV at night. You and I got to realize there's a Super Bowl. We got to be in the Super Bowl stadium, and we got to play on the field. We're in the game. You may be the water boy, the quarterback, whatever, but you got to realize you got to play in the biggest game. People got to realize this. Absolutely. And I think this is the biggest story that will ever come down the pike. Nothing is bigger than this. Nothing. And you got to record your story as your role in this thing, because the world is about to shift, and this is about to be, people are going to realize this is bigger than Jesus. This is bigger than any story that's ever been told.
Possibly even bigger than the Beatles. And somehow related.
Yeah.
Well, Grant, I'm so grateful for you generously sharing your time with us today. Thank you for sharing this profound insights and ideas about the nature of reality, and for your inspiring spirit, which I think will uplift anybody who listens to it, and will tend to move people toward a more curious and, I would hope, deeper view of the world. I'll be processing this discussion for a really long time, and I'm very grateful for you sharing your precious time with us. Thank you so much.
If there's any experiencers out there who think they have a piece of the puzzle they want to share, I'm glad to talk to them, because those are the people I'm very interested in, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I've missed. So people are there, and they should tell their story. So thanks a lot.
And that's the show. Thank you for watching or listening. Please support us on patreon.com/WTUFO, patreon.com/WTUFO. That will increase the odds that the show continues to exist. If you're listening in a podcast format, you can also rate and review us on your podcast player of choice. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. It also never hurts to tell a friend about us or pop us in a social feed. Maybe if you have a favorite episode, you could share it on a thread somewhere. Thank you again for watching, listening, enjoying, and supporting, and I hope you're all having a great day.